My brother married a billionaire. I wasn't invited. You're the biggest embarrassment of my life. Don't you dare show up at my wedding, he said coldly. I didn't argue. I simply stayed home and wished him happiness from afar. Exactly 1 hour after the ceremony began, the police knocked on my door. Before I could even ask what was happening, one of the officers said, "The bride is requesting your presence at the wedding immediately." My name is Simone. I am 32 years old and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a successful founder in the financial technology space, I escaped their toxicity but maintained occasional contact. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your true worth. I had just landed at Hartsfield-Jackson, Atlanta International Airport after a grueling 14-hour flight from a high-stakes business conference in Dubai. My body ached deeply, my eyes were incredibly heavy with physical exhaustion, and the bustling, chaotic crowds of the terminal only amplified the pounding headache blooming behind my temples. I pulled out my phone, standing near the bustling baggage claim carousel, and opened our family group chat. Flight lands at 5 p.m. Can someone pick me up? I typed, watching the little blue bubble pop onto the screen. I was not asking for a grand celebratory welcome with balloons and fanfare. I simply wanted a basic ride home from my own flesh and blood after a long, exhausting journey across the globe. However, growing up in our family, everything was a fierce competition I was fundamentally destined to lose. My mother, Brenda, was completely obsessed with Atlanta Black elite society. She lived entirely for the validation and approval of her church circles, the prestigious country club luncheons, and the social currency of having children who fit her perfect light-skinned, socially acceptable mold. My brother Trey fit that mold effortlessly. He was 3 years older with much lighter skin, loose curls, and a smooth silver tongue that could easily charm anyone into believing his grandest lies. I, on the other hand, had dark, rich skin, thick natural hair, and always preferred coding in quiet rooms over attending lavish cotillions. I was the dark-skinned daughter she never knew how to show off, the one who constantly failed to meet her superficial standards of beauty and grace. My phone buzzed sharply in my hand. It was Trey. "We are busy. Try Uber." I stared at the brightly lit screen. Just 5 words completely devoid of any sibling warmth or basic human decency. Before I could even fully process the sting of his dismissal, another message popped up rapidly. This one was from my mother. "Why did not you plan better? You know, Trey is getting married to Vivian this weekend. We are dealing with the Sterling family. We absolutely do not have time for your persistent lack of preparation." I took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the familiar heavy weight of their lifelong rejection settling over my chest like a lead blanket. I started to type a polite response, but Trey was not finished delivering his venom. "Honestly, Simone, do not even bother coming around this weekend. You are a dropout failure. Your broke, pitiful aesthetic is going to completely embarrass me in front of the Sterling family. They are Spelman and Morehouse alumni. They are literal royalty in this city. You showing up looking like a desperate charity case is the biggest embarrassment of my life. Do not you dare show your face." Another harsh buzz vibrated through my palm. My mother chimed in eagerly to support her golden boy. "Trey is absolutely right. I already told Vivian's parents that you are out of state in a rehabilitation center." It was the only acceptable way to explain why my daughter is not successful like her brother. Do not ruin this incredible opportunity for your brother. This wedding is his ultimate chance to secure his future in high society. Just stay hidden in your little apartment and stay far away from the estate. I read the cruel messages twice, letting the reality of their words sink in completely. My own mother had deliberately told a billionaire family that I was currently residing in a drug rehab center just to hide my existence from their pristine world. She was so profoundly ashamed of me, so entirely convinced of my utter failure, that she preferred to paint me as a struggling addict rather than proudly claim me as her own daughter. Instead of breaking down in tears, instead of desperately begging for their love and inclusion like I used to when I was a vulnerable teenager, I felt a profound, chilling sense of absolute calm wash over my tired body. I typed two simple words: no worries. I hit send and locked my phone, slipping it back into my pocket. I did not shed a single tear in that crowded terminal. I did not feel the crushing, debilitating devastation they so desperately wanted me to feel. I calmly picked up my designer luggage, which was entirely logo-free and understated in its quiet luxury, and walked out through the automatic sliding glass doors of the terminal into the warm evening air. A sleek midnight black Maybach was idling perfectly at the VIP curb. My private chauffeur, a tall, distinguished man named David, immediately stepped out respectfully, tipping his hat as I approached. "Welcome back to Atlanta, Ms. Simone." "How was the flight?" David asked, taking my heavy bags with practiced, effortless efficiency. "Long, David. But it is very good to finally be home," I replied smoothly, sliding into the buttery, pristine leather seats of the luxury vehicle. My family genuinely believed I was a broke college dropout living in a run-down, cramped apartment on the wrong side of town. They had absolutely no idea that the secure financial technology firm I founded from scratch was currently valued at a staggering $1.5 billion. They did not know that I was the anonymous whale investor quietly buying up premium real estate and innovative tech startups across the Southeast. And they certainly did not know that I was the powerful silent partner backing the very corporate acquisitions that the Sterling family was currently aggressively negotiating. As the Maybach glided smoothly onto the bustling highway, the dark-tinted windows perfectly shielding me from the glaring Georgia sun, my mind drifted back to a highly volatile family dinner just 1 month prior. It was the last time I had seen Trey and my mother in person, and the memory still burned vividly in my mind. We were dining at an incredibly high-end steakhouse in Midtown, a place completely out of Trey's actual financial budget, but perfectly suited for the wealthy, successful image he so desperately tried to project to the world. Trey had spent the entire agonizing evening bragging incessantly about Vivian Sterling. He talked endlessly about her family's vast media empire, their deeply rooted generational wealth, and how he was finally going to take his rightful elevated place among Atlanta's elite society. "Vivian is absolutely incredible," Trey had boasted loudly, swirling his expensive aged bourbon in his crystal glass. "Her father, Winston, is actually trusting me to handle a massive, highly sensitive portfolio merger for their firm. I am finally getting the respect and power I deserve." My mother had beamed at him across the table, her eyes shining with genuine tears of absolute pride and adoration. "You were always destined for greatness, Trey. You have the perfect look, the undeniable charm, the sheer brilliance. The Sterlings are incredibly lucky to have you joining their family." She then turned her critical gaze to me, the maternal warmth instantly vanishing from her face, replaced by a familiar sneer. Her judgmental eyes scanned my simple, unbranded cashmere sweater, completely misinterpreting my quiet luxury for cheap discount clothing. "And you, Simone, are you still doing your little computer typing jobs? Still living paycheck to paycheck, struggling to survive?" "I am doing just fine, Mom," I had answered calmly, deliberately, slicing into my perfectly cooked steak without looking up. "Fine is not success," Trey sneered, leaning forward aggressively. "Fine is exactly why you do not fit in with us. You dropped out of college. You ruined your own potential. Honestly, it is completely exhausting having to explain you and your failures to my successful friends." When the waiter eventually brought the bill presenting a leather-bound folder containing a grand total of $2,000, Trey did not even reach for his tailored wallet. He slid the heavy folder directly across the white linen tablecloth until it hit my plate with a soft thud. "You pay?" Trey demanded, a cruel, entitled smirk playing on his lips. "Consider it your long overdue contribution to the family. Since you have been a lifelong disappointment and a constant source of stress and embarrassment for Mom, buying us a nice dinner is the absolute least you can do." $2,000 is quite a lot for a simple dinner tray, I noted evenly, carefully watching his arrogant reaction. Oh, do not tell me you cannot afford it, my mother snapped sharply, rolling her eyes in dramatic disgust. If you cannot even pay for a single family meal, you truly are completely useless. Just put it on whatever high-interest credit card you are currently surviving on and figure it out later. I did not argue with them. I did not attempt to defend myself or my finances. I simply reached into my purse and pulled out my solid metal black card. I kept my thumb strategically placed over the exclusive private banking logo so they would not recognize the elite tier of wealth it represented. I handed it to the waiter without a second thought or a single flinch. Trey had laughed out loud foolishly, assuming I had just plunged myself into massive consumer debt merely to appease their demands. He had absolutely no idea that $2,000 was significantly less than what my company generated in a single minute of passive interest. He had no idea that the massive, lucrative portfolio merger he was bragging about handling for Winston Sterling was actually a brilliantly laid trap. He did not know that the anonymous, powerful corporate entity slowly and systematically dismantling his fake business empire was entirely owned and operated by the very sister he was currently mocking. Now sitting comfortably in the quiet back seat of the Maybach, I looked out at the passing city skyline with a serene smile. My family was frantically preparing for the wedding of the decade, fully believing they had successfully hidden their embarrassing dark-skinned dropout daughter from the high society world they coveted. They thought they had finally secured their permanent place among the elite. They truly believed their lifelong cruelty had finally beaten me into quiet submission. They were completely wrong. I was not going to the wedding, but my presence was going to be felt in a way they could never possibly imagine. The storm I had been quietly, meticulously brewing for 7 long years was finally ready to make landfall, and they were completely unprepared for the absolute devastation it would soon bring to their carefully constructed house of cards. The destruction of their fake legacy was about to begin. The early morning of my brother's highly anticipated wedding dawned bright and obnoxiously clear over Atlanta. I stood on the expansive glass balcony of my Buckhead penthouse, sipping a freshly brewed espresso while looking down at the sprawling city below. The sleek, minimalist space around me was a stark contrast to the cramped, rundown apartment my family was absolutely certain I lived in. My mother probably envisioned me waking up on a stained mattress, bitterly crying over my exclusion from the greatest social event of her entire life. Instead, I was wrapped in a plush silk robe reviewing a highly classified financial dossier on my encrypted tablet. I scrolled through the meticulously compiled data, my eyes tracing the rapid, systematic collapse of Trey's fake business empire. Over the past 8 months, I had acted as the anonymous whale investor in the background, aggressively and quietly acquiring every single one of his major competitors. I bought their debts, absorbed their market shares, and essentially choked off his revenue streams one by one. Trey had desperately tried to keep his sinking ship afloat, taking out massive, predatory loans from deeply dangerous underground lenders just to maintain his illusion of massive wealth. He needed to look like a self-made titan to impress Winston Sterling Vivian's notoriously ruthless billionaire father. Trey thought he was a master manipulator, but he was entirely oblivious to the fact that I was the invisible hand steadily tightening the noose around his neck. Today was the day he planned to execute his grandest illusion yet. He intended to use the sacred vows of marriage to trick the Sterling patriarch into signing a $50 million merger deal. That massive injection of capital was his only hope of avoiding federal prison or a violent visit from his deeply shady creditors. I closed the dossier and set the tablet on the marble kitchen island, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction. Everything was perfectly aligned. My phone lay silent on the counter, devoid of any final guilt-ridden messages from the family who threw me away. They were too busy celebrating their perceived victory, adjusting their custom tuxedos and lavish gowns, completely unaware of the absolute devastation brewing right above their heads. The sharp, heavy pounding on my custom oak front door broke the quiet stillness of the morning. It was not the gentle, polite knock of building security or a delivery driver. It was authoritative, demanding, and incredibly loud. My heart skipped a sudden beat, and my mind instantly raced to the most logical conclusion. Trey had actually done it. He was so terrified of me ruining his perfect day, so utterly paranoid, that my dark-skinned dropout presence would somehow taint his proximity to the light-skinned elite Sterling family, that he had taken extreme measures. I assumed he had filed a completely fabricated restraining order against me. It would be a classic predictable move from his toxic playbook. He probably lied to a judge claiming I was an unstable, dangerous addict who intended to violently disrupt his high society wedding. He wanted the police to physically threaten me to ensure I stayed locked away in my supposed poverty while he secured his massive payday. I tightened the belt of my robe and walked slowly toward the door, mentally preparing myself for a hostile confrontation. I took a deep breath, expecting to see angry cops ready to read me my rights or serve me with legal papers, ordering me to stay 100 yards away from the grand estate. I pulled the heavy door open, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. Two uniformed Atlanta police officers stood in the carpeted hallway. However, their hands were resting comfortably at their sides, not hovering near their utility belts. Their posture was relaxed, and their faces held absolutely no hostility. In fact, they looked incredibly deferential, almost nervous to be standing in front of my expensive residence. "Good morning," the taller officer said, removing his cap with a polite, respectful nod. "Are you Ms. Simone?" "I am," I replied cautiously, my guard still fully up, my voice steady. "How can I help you, officers?" The second officer stepped forward slightly, offering a warm, almost apologetic smile. "Ms. Simone, we have been sent here directly by Ms. Vivian Sterling. She requires your presence at her wedding immediately. We are here to provide you with a secure, expedited police escort to the estate." I stood completely frozen in my doorway, my mind rapidly processing this massive, unexpected twist. Vivian Sterling, the beautiful, highly educated, fiercely intelligent bride, had sent a personal police escort to retrieve me. She had not sent them to arrest me or serve me with a restraining order. She had sent them to ensure I arrived safely and swiftly. A slow, knowing smile began to spread across my face. Vivian was no fool. She was a brilliant woman who understood business just as well as her billionaire father. She had clearly uncovered the truth. "Please give me exactly 10 minutes to get dressed," I told the officers, my voice steady and commanding. "I will not keep the bride waiting." "Take your time, ma'am," the taller officer replied respectfully. "We will be waiting right here in the hall whenever you are ready." I walked back into my penthouse, my pulse humming with an electric, exhilarating energy. The trap had finally snapped shut. I quickly changed into a stunning, custom-tailored emerald green suit that screamed quiet, undeniable power. It was elegant, razor-sharp, and cost more than my mother's entire wardrobe. I slipped on my favorite diamond stud earrings, grabbed my sleek leather briefcase containing all the physical evidence, and walked back out the door. The officers immediately escorted me down the private elevator and out to the street where a marked police cruiser was waiting with its lights silently flashing. I slid into the back seat, the heavy door closing with a solid thud. It was a fascinating juxtaposition. Here I was, sitting in the back of a police car, not as a captured criminal or a disgraced addict like my family so desperately wanted to believe, but as an esteemed, highly sought-after VIP guest. The officers climbed into the front, activated the siren, and we pulled away from the curb, speeding onto the busy Atlanta streets. The wail of the sirens parted the heavy weekend traffic like the Red Sea, propelling me directly toward the very event I had been so viciously banned from attending. As the cruiser wove seamlessly through the morning traffic, the sirens clearing a rapid path toward the sprawling Sterling estate, I sat back and looked out the window. The tension in the car was palpable, vibrating with the sheer magnitude of what was about to unfold. I rested my hand on my leather briefcase, feeling the solid weight of the documents inside. My mind began piecing together exactly how Vivian and her family had finally figured it out. Winston Sterling did not become a billionaire by blindly trusting smooth-talking men in nice suits. He had an entire team of ruthless forensic accountants and elite corporate investigators, led by Vivian's sharp, highly protective cousin Darius. I knew they would deeply audit Trey's fake company before ever signing a $50 million merger. Over the past few weeks, I had intentionally left a trail of complex, heavily encrypted financial breadcrumbs deeply embedded in Trey's falsified business records. I hid subtle discrepancies in his asset declarations, tiny irregularities in his patent filings, and massive red flags in his supposed revenue streams. I made the trail incredibly difficult to follow, requiring genuine brilliance to decode because I needed the Sterlings to discover the truth themselves. If I had just walked up and told them Trey was a fraud, they would have dismissed me as a bitter, jealous sister trying to ruin a beautiful union. But by letting their own elite investigators follow the digital blood trails, the truth became undeniable. They had clearly traced the ownership of the heavily guarded patents. They had tracked the massive debts Trey was hiding from everyone. And most importantly, they had finally pierced the veil of my anonymous corporate structure and discovered the ultimate reality. They realized that the true architect, the real billionaire quietly running the entire show, was the dark-skinned sister Trey had cruelly banished from the wedding. The very same sister my toxic mother claimed was wasting away in a rehabilitation facility. The sprawling, magnificent gates of the Sterling estate finally came into view, towering majestically over the manicured landscape. The massive security presence at the entrance immediately stepped aside quickly, recognizing the flashing blue lights of my official police escort. My heart pounded deeply with fierce, resolute anticipation. The long, silent years of enduring their psychological abuse were officially over. The grand estate was getting closer, and the final, inescapable judgment was imminent. The false legacy they blindly worshipped was about to burn to the absolute ground. As the police cruiser roared down the highway, sirens drowned out the city noise. I leaned against the cool glass, watching the towering pine trees and iron gates of Buckhead blur into a continuous green streak. Moving rapidly toward my vindication triggered a deeply painful memory. The contrast between this respectful police escort and the freezing night I was violently thrown away could not have been more extreme. My mind drifted back to why I was known as a pathetic college dropout. 7 years ago, I was a fiercely dedicated university student, spending every waking hour hunched over a glowing monitor in a cramped dormitory. While my peers partied at glamorous campus events, I was writing complex code. I had successfully developed a revolutionary financial encryption algorithm. It was a unique, highly secure architecture designed to protect institutional funds from aggressive cyber attacks. It was my masterpiece, my ticket to immense success. I poured my soul into that prototype, surviving on cheap noodles just to finish the programming. Meanwhile, my older brother Trey was drowning in a terrifying ocean of his own making. Behind his expensive suits and charming smile, he was deeply addicted to high-stakes underground gambling. He owed massive amounts of money to very dangerous predatory lenders operating in the dark corners of the city. These were not men who politely asked for their money back. They were the kind who broke bones and ruined lives. Trey was desperate, frantic, and running out of time. He needed a miracle to save himself from severe physical harm. He found that miracle sitting unattended on my desk. One evening while I was exhausted and sleeping in the campus library, Trey used the spare key my mother forced me to give him. He sneaked into my dorm like a common thief. He stole my physical encrypted hard drive containing the only complete master copy of my algorithm. He then ruthlessly hacked into my cloud storage, systematically changing all my master access passwords and security questions. In one single calculated move, he completely locked me out of my own brilliant creation. He took my revolutionary prototype and shamelessly presented it to a naive angel investor as his own genius invention. He used my stolen life's work to secure a massive initial business loan, paying off his violent gambling debts and officially launching his fraudulent corporate empire. When I finally realized what had happened, a cold, sickening panic gripped my entire body. I immediately tracked Trey down to the luxury apartment our mother rented for him. I slammed my fists against his door until he finally opened it, holding a glass of expensive champagne, looking completely unbothered. I demanded my hard drive back, my voice shaking with raw, unadulterated fury. I told him I knew exactly what he had done. Trey simply took a slow sip of his drink and laughed right in my face. His eyes were cold, completely devoid of any remorse or sibling affection. He leaned casually against the doorframe, looking me up and down with sheer disgust. "You are crazy, Simone," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You have absolutely no proof. The code is under my name now. The investment is in my bank account. Who do you honestly think is going to believe you? You are just a stressed-out, average-looking, dark-skinned girl who cannot even handle her basic college classes. I am the handsome, charismatic businessman heading straight to the top of Atlanta society. You are nothing but a jealous, bitter loser trying to steal my hard-earned success." I felt the air leave my lungs as he slammed the heavy wooden door directly in my face, the finality of the loud click echoing in the empty hallway. I was completely shattered, but I still possessed a tiny, foolish sliver of hope. I ran straight to our family home, desperately seeking the one person who was supposed to protect me. I burst through the front door, crying frantically, begging my mother Brenda for help. I explained every single detail. I told her about the stolen hard drive, the changed passwords, the massive gambling debts Trey was desperately hiding from her. I pleaded with her to intervene to force him to return my stolen intellectual property before it was too late. Brenda stood silently in the grand foyer, her face an unreadable mask of cold stone. She slowly walked toward me, her designer heels clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor. I reached out my hands to her, expecting a maternal embrace, expecting righteous anger on my behalf. Instead, Brenda raised her hand and delivered a vicious, stinging slap across my cheek. The loud crack of her palm against my skin completely paralyzed me. The physical pain was nothing compared to the absolute devastation of realizing she chose her golden boy over the truth. "Stop your pathetic lying right now," Brenda hissed, her eyes blazing with furious contempt. "How dare you accuse your brother of such terrible things? Trey is a brilliant young man building a beautiful future. You are just extremely jealous because he possesses the charm, the light skin, and the natural intelligence that you severely lack." "Mom, I swear to you, he stole everything from me," I sobbed, clutching my stinging cheek. "He owes dangerous people money. He is going to ruin our family." "The only person ruining this family is you!" Brenda screamed, her perfectly manicured fingers grabbing my arm violently. She dragged me up the grand staircase and pushed me into my bedroom. "You are utterly delusional and jealous. You cannot stand to see your brother shine. You are trying to sabotage his pristine image right when he is finally being accepted into the elite circles of this city. I will not let your ugly, bitter lies destroy his flawless reputation." Before I could even process her horrifying betrayal, Brenda began frantically pulling my clothes from the closet. She grabbed my textbooks, my shoes, and my personal belongings, throwing them carelessly into heavy garbage bags. She did not even bother folding them. She treated my possessions like toxic waste that needed to be violently purged from her immaculate home. "Get your things and get out of my house," she commanded, her voice void of any maternal warmth. I refuse to harbor a vindictive, lying snake who tries to tear down her own flesh and blood. You are a complete embarrassment. She dragged the heavy plastic bags down the stairs, ignoring my desperate, pleading cries. She opened the heavy front door and violently hurled my belongings onto the cold, wet concrete of the front porch. The pouring rain immediately began soaking through the thin plastic, ruining the few possessions I had left to my name. I stood on the porch, shivering uncontrollably in the freezing downpour, staring at the woman who gave birth to me. "Do not ever come back here," Brenda warned, pointing a sharp, perfectly painted fingernail directly at my chest. "Do not you dare contact Trey, and do not you dare spread your crazy, delusional lies to anyone in our church or our social circles. If anyone asks you dropped out of college because you could not handle the academic pressure, you are dead to this family until you learn your proper place." She slammed the heavy wooden door shut, the loud, definitive boom echoing through the stormy night. The deadbolt slid into place with a sharp metallic click, sealing my fate. I stood there completely drenched, completely alone, and utterly betrayed by the two people who were supposed to be my safe harbor. My own mother had violently sacrificed my entire future, my brilliant creation, and my basic human dignity solely to protect a lying, thieving fraud. She willingly threw me out into the harsh, unforgiving streets of Atlanta just to ensure her golden boy could continue his fake ascent into high society. That night, as I dragged my soaking wet garbage bags down the darkened sidewalk, shivering from the cold and the profound shock of absolute betrayal, I made a silent, unbreakable promise to myself. I would never beg for their love again. I would never allow anyone to make me feel small, ugly, or insignificant ever again. They had stolen my prototype, but they could never steal my brilliant mind. They thought they had permanently destroyed me. They thought I would simply vanish into obscurity, a forgotten tragic footnote in Trey's glorious fabricated success story. As the heavy police cruiser took a sudden sharp turn, pulling me completely back to the present moment, I smoothed the emerald silk of my trousers. I looked closely at my reflection in the dark window. I was no longer that crying, desperate girl standing on a rainy porch. I was now a formidable, highly calculated force of nature, returning to collect every debt owed to me with cold, merciless precision. The truth is that survival leaves absolutely no room for self-pity. After my mother threw my garbage bags onto the street that night, I spent the first 3 months living in the back seat of a heavily dented second-hand Honda Civic. I parked under flickering streetlights in commercial districts to feel safe, washing my face in public library bathrooms, and surviving entirely on cheap peanut butter sandwiches. My family assumed I would completely crumble under the crushing weight of their rejection. They fully expected me to come crawling back to their grand foyer, begging on my knees for forgiveness, ready to accept my assigned role as the ugly, incompetent sister. I refused to give them that satisfaction. Instead of breaking down, I funneled every single ounce of my intense, burning rage into absolute pure focus. I took my meager wages from a grueling night shift job at a local diner and bought the cheapest refurbished laptop I could find at a pawn shop. I sat in brightly lit 24-hour coffee shops, ordering one small black coffee to justify taking up a table, and I began to type. I started entirely from scratch. I knew the exact flaws in the stolen prototype Trey was currently parading around town. It was brilliant, but it was still just an early draft. So I spent countless sleepless nights rewriting the entire financial encryption algorithm. I built a dynamic, self-learning defensive architecture that was 100 times more complex and 10 times harder to crack than the version my brother stole. I created digital traps, deep encrypted vaults, and unbreakable security protocols that the biggest financial institutions in the world were desperately begging for to protect their institutional wealth. But I also knew the harsh reality of the corporate technology world. I was a young, dark-skinned black woman without a completed college degree. If I simply walked into a venture capital firm and pitched my software, the arrogant, biased executives would instantly dismiss me, or worse, try to steal my intellectual property, just like my own brother had done. Furthermore, if I attached my real name to the software, my mother and Trey would inevitably find out. They would immediately launch malicious lawsuits, dragging me into endless, exhausting legal battles to claim my new company was built using the resources they supposedly gave me. I needed a completely impenetrable shield. I aggressively researched corporate law and established a complex web of blind trusts and holding companies. At the absolute center of this web, I created a Delaware limited liability company. Delaware corporate laws offer absolute ironclad anonymity for business owners. There were no public records linking my name, my face, or my background to the massive entity I was rapidly building. To the outside world, my company was a faceless, deeply intimidating corporate titan known simply as Aegis Financial Security. I communicated with powerful investors, elite bank executives, and major international clients exclusively through heavily encrypted emails and high-priced, aggressively loyal corporate attorneys who were legally bound by airtight non-disclosure agreements to never reveal my identity. Operating from the dark, quiet shadows gave me an incredible, terrifying amount of power. Without a face to judge, the market simply judged my product, and my product was absolutely flawless. Within 2 years, my software was securing the daily transactions of 3 major international banks. Within 4 years, Aegis had completely monopolized the private wealth security sector across the entire eastern seaboard. Today, sitting in the back of this police cruiser, my completely anonymous, fiercely protected company boasts an official verified valuation of $1.5 billion. I am a self-made billionaire before the age of 33. I possess enough liquid capital to buy my mother's country club and turn it into a parking lot. Yet I intentionally maintained the illusion of my failure. Whenever I sent my mother mandatory holiday text messages from a burner phone to maintain a deceptive baseline of contact, I made sure to complain about rent increases or terrible bosses. I fed their massive egos, letting them comfortably believe their golden boy was the only success story this family would ever produce. While I was meticulously building my massive empire in absolute secrecy, I kept a very close, highly analytical eye on Trey. I watched from the shadows as he launched Nexus, the tech company built entirely on the fragile foundation of my stolen prototype. At first, he experienced the wild, flashy success my mother always dreamed of. He bought sports cars, wore custom Italian suits, and aggressively networked his way into the highest tiers of Atlanta's black elite. He courted Vivian Sterling with flashy dinners and luxurious trips, using my stolen genius to present himself as a brilliant self-made tech prodigy worthy of marrying into a dynasty. But I knew the absolute truth. I knew the fatal flaw in the stolen code. Trey was a smooth-talking salesman, not a software engineer. He had absolutely no idea how to properly update the architecture or patch the inevitable security vulnerabilities that arise when scaling a financial platform. As Nexus took on bigger, more demanding clients, the software began to severely buckle under the heavy pressure. The system experienced massive crashes, catastrophic data leaks, and deeply angry clients demanding immediate refunds. To keep up appearances and hide his rapid failure from the elite social circles he worshipped, Trey turned to the absolute worst kind of help. He started borrowing massive sums of money from deeply dangerous, violent underground syndicates to artificially inflate his company's revenue reports. He was running a desperate, bleeding Ponzi scheme just to afford the massive engagement ring he bought for Vivian. My proprietary financial tracking algorithms easily detected his massive debt defaults. I knew his current company was entirely bankrupt, operating on fumes and dangerous lies. The violent creditors were rapidly closing in, demanding their millions back with terrifying interest rates. Trey was quite literally facing federal prison for corporate fraud, or worse, a violent execution in a dark alley. He needed a massive, immediate bailout, and he found it in Winston Sterling. The Sterling family possessed immense generational wealth, but they were historically rooted in traditional real estate and legacy media. They were desperately looking to modernize their massive portfolio by acquiring a prominent, successful technology firm. Trey manipulated his way into their boardroom, presenting falsified revenue reports and completely fabricated user metrics. He proposed a massive $50 million merger deal, claiming his company would seamlessly integrate with their corporate empire and revolutionize their daily operations. He planned to use their $50 million investment to quietly pay off his terrifying loan sharks and secure his permanent, untouchable place in Atlanta's most powerful family. He was not marrying Vivian Sterling out of profound, genuine love or mutual respect. He was marrying her because he needed a wealthy, powerful human shield to save his pathetic, fraudulent life. He thought he was the smartest man in the entire city, pulling off the absolute con of the century right under the nose of a ruthless billionaire patriarch. But Trey made one massive, catastrophic miscalculation. He severely underestimated the quiet, observant sister he had violently thrown away. He never imagined that the anonymous corporate entity slowly buying up his remaining debts and cornering his fragile market share was me. He never considered that I had deliberately left the digital evidence of his fraud in places where Vivian's highly trained corporate investigators would eventually find it. I watched the immense, towering, solid wrought iron gates of the Sterling estate draw rapidly closer through the dark-tinted glass of the speeding police cruiser. The imposing stone pillars were flanked by lush, perfectly manicured gardens that screamed of untouchable prestige and incredible generational power. This was the exact grand stage my mother had prayed to reach her entire desperate life. She was probably inside right now wearing a wildly expensive, completely unpaid-for gown, sipping premium champagne and crying fake performative tears of joy. She fully believed she had finally secured her permanent elevated status among the absolute highest echelons of Atlanta high society. She thought the dark, embarrassing secret of my existence was safely locked away forever, leaving only the pristine golden image of her perfectly successful son for the world to admire. The heavy police cruiser slowed down abruptly as we approached the main estate security checkpoint. The armed guards took one look at the flashing blue lights and the official city seals on the vehicle before immediately raising the massive steel barricades. We did not stop. We drove straight through, heavy tires crunching loudly against the pristine white gravel of the long winding driveway. The imposing, magnificent mansion loomed ahead, surrounded by hundreds of luxury vehicles belonging to the city's most powerful elite. The incredibly detailed trap was set. The cold execution was already in motion. The shadow empire I built from nothing was about to violently collide with his lies. The heavy police cruiser did not park discreetly near the valet station. Instead, the driving officer bypassed the designated guest drop-off zones, entirely navigating the vehicle straight onto the immaculate, sprawling green lawn of the Sterling estate. Thick tires ruthlessly crushed the pristine white rose petals that had been meticulously arranged along the grand central walkway. The jarring, aggressive wail of the police siren finally cut off, replaced by the sudden deafening silence of 500 elite guests freezing in absolute shock. A renowned string quartet previously playing a delicate classical melody screeched to an abrupt and deeply uncomfortable halt. Every single head in the massive open-air pavilion turned simultaneously toward the flashing blue lights. Politicians, wealthy media moguls, and the highest-ranking members of Atlanta society stared in utter bewilderment. They were completely unaccustomed to such a violent disruption of their sacred exclusive spaces. I sat calmly in the back seat, taking one final deep breath before the doors unlocked. Through the tinted window, I could clearly see the lavish altar constructed at the far end of the property. Towering arches of imported white orchids framed the extravagant stage. Standing there, bathed in the afternoon sunlight, was my brother Trey. He was wearing a custom-tailored ivory tuxedo, looking every bit the wealthy, successful tech titan he pretended to be. Beside him stood Vivian Sterling, radiating absolute power and elegance in a breathtaking custom couture bridal gown that easily cost a fortune. Just a few feet away, Winston Sterling sat in the front row, his posture rigid, his face an unreadable mask of cold, calculated authority. The atmosphere was thick with suffocating tension. The wedding ceremony had been halted mere seconds before the official exchanging of the sacred vows. The taller police officer quickly stepped out of the vehicle, marching around to the rear passenger side. He opened my door and respectfully extended his hand to assist me. I ignored his hand, stepping out of the cruiser with my head held high, my posture radiating complete, undeniable confidence. The vibrant, sharp emerald silk of my designer suit immediately caught the sunlight. I adjusted my grip on my heavy leather briefcase, the silver clasps gleaming brightly. A collective, audible gasp rippled through the seated congregation. Hundreds of wealthy guests leaned forward, whispering frantically to one another, completely desperate to understand why a police escort had just delivered a woman to the center of the wedding aisle. I kept my eyes locked dead ahead, staring directly at the grand altar. The illusion of my family's perfect high society triumph was about to be violently torn apart. Trey saw me immediately. From 50 yards away, I watched the arrogant, triumphant smirk completely vanish from his handsome face. All the color rapidly drained from his light skin, leaving him looking like a terrified, cornered animal. His broad shoulders instantly slumped, and his hands began to visibly tremble at his sides. He frantically looked around the altar, his eyes darting wildly between his stunning bride, his powerful soon-to-be father-in-law, and the police officers flanking me. He was desperately trying to calculate how his supposedly broken, drug-addicted failure of a sister had managed to escape her fabricated rehabilitation center. He had no idea how I had bypassed his elaborate web of lies to stand proudly on the very lawn he thought he had conquered. His fraudulent, meticulously crafted world was rapidly collapsing right before his very eyes. Then the true chaos finally erupted. Sitting prominently in the front row, wearing an absurdly extravagant, heavily feathered fascinator hat that she absolutely could not afford, was my mother. Brenda had been basking in the glorious, intoxicating attention of the wealthy guests all afternoon. When she finally registered my presence, her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The very sight of my dark skin and natural hair standing confidently in her elite space triggered a vicious, uncontrollable panic inside her. She completely abandoned all pretense of high society decorum. She violently pushed her chair back, ignoring the startled gasps of the wealthy matriarch sitting right beside her. She aggressively hiked up the skirt of her expensive, unpaid-for designer gown and began charging furiously down the white-carpeted aisle directly toward me. Her eyes were wide with genuine desperate terror. "Arrest her right now!" Brenda shrieked at the top of her lungs, her shrill voice echoing terribly across the manicured lawn and completely ruining the elegant ambiance. "She is entirely unhinged. She is a dangerous, unstable addict. Get this absolute embarrassment out of here immediately." She pointed a shaking manicured finger directly at my face, frantically waving at the two uniformed officers. "She does not belong here. She is completely obsessed with ruining her brother. She escaped her treatment facility. Take her away before she violently attacks someone." Her desperate, wildly fabricated lies poured out of her mouth like toxic venom. She was entirely willing to have her own flesh and blood violently tackled and thrown into the back of a police cruiser just to preserve the fake, glittering image she had sold to the powerful Sterling family. She wanted me erased. I did not flinch. I did not step back, and I absolutely did not lower my gaze. I stood my ground, my expression as cold and unforgiving as solid ice. The two police officers immediately stepped forward, placing themselves directly between me and my frantic, screaming mother. The taller officer firmly placed his hand on his heavy-duty belt, his stance shifting into a defensive, authoritative command position. "Ma'am, you need to step back immediately," the officer warned, his loud, booming voice effortlessly cutting through Brenda's hysterical, ear-piercing shrieks. "Do not take another step toward this woman. We are operating under strict direct orders to ensure her absolute safety and protection. Back away now, or you will be physically restrained." The severe, uncompromising threat of actual arrest finally pierced through Brenda's blind, furious panic. She stopped abruptly in the middle of the aisle. Brenda stood paralyzed, her chest heaving heavily as she looked wildly between the stern police officers and my calm, deeply amused face. The wealthy guests seated around her were openly staring in absolute horror and profound disgust. The elegant, sophisticated mother of the groom was throwing a massive, undignified temper tantrum like a spoiled child. Her coveted social standing within the elite church circles and the prestigious country clubs was rapidly evaporating with every passing second. She turned her desperate, pleading eyes toward the altar, looking for Trey to somehow salvage the catastrophic situation. Trey, however, was completely frozen in place. He looked absolutely sick, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. He knew this was not a simple misunderstanding. He instinctively recognized that my confident, unapologetic presence here meant that his darkest, most heavily guarded secrets were no longer safe. Trey frantically grabbed Vivian's arm, his grip tight and desperate. "Vivian, baby, please do not look at her," he pleaded, his voice cracking pathetically over the silent crowd. "She is deeply unwell. She is just having a severe manic episode. Let the police drag her away so we can finally finish our beautiful vows. I am so incredibly sorry for this insane disruption." He tried to physically pull Vivian back toward the officiant, desperately attempting to force the ceremony to continue, despite the glaring, undeniable reality unfolding right in front of them. He needed her to say "I do" before the truth could completely destroy him. He needed that legal binding marriage certificate to shield him from the violent creditors hunting him down. He thought he could still control the narrative. He thought Vivian was just a naive, trusting bride. Vivian Sterling did not panic. She did not cry, and she certainly did not look at Trey with any bridal affection. She slowly turned her head, her beautiful, highly intelligent eyes locking onto Trey's frantic, sweating face. With a swift, incredibly sharp motion, she violently yanked her arm out of his desperate grip. She looked at him with a level of profound, chilling disgust that made my own heart race with sheer satisfaction. She did not utter a single word to him. Instead, Vivian elegantly gathered the heavy, voluminous layers of her custom couture gown. With absolute, undeniable regal authority, she slowly stepped down from the elevated flower-covered altar. The entire audience held their collective breath, watching the billionaire heiress abandon her own wedding ceremony with striking, terrifying grace. She was a woman completely in control of her domain. Moving perfectly in sync beside her was Darius, her imposing, broad-shouldered cousin. Darius was not just family, he was the Sterling Empire's lead corporate investigator. He was the ruthless, brilliant mind responsible for aggressively vetting every single business deal and every single person who attempted to enter their exclusive inner circle. He walked with a dark, predatory grace, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd before locking dead onto me. He carried a thick leather-bound folio under his muscular arm. Together, Vivian and Darius walked slowly down the white-carpeted aisle, leaving a completely broken, hyperventilating Trey standing alone at the altar. They moved with absolute synchronized purpose, heading straight toward the center of the lawn where I stood waiting. The power dynamic in the sprawling estate had completely irrevocably shifted, and every single guest present could feel it. As Vivian and Darius approached, Brenda mistakenly believed they were coming to support her. "Oh, Vivian, sweetheart, I am so deeply sorry," Brenda cried out, attempting to reach out and touch the bride's expensive lace sleeve. "My deeply troubled daughter has ruined your perfect day. Please let security throw her out. We will pay for all the damages, I promise you." Trey is just as horrified as we are. Brenda's desperate, groveling attempts to salvage her proximity to wealth were genuinely pathetic to witness. She was willing to completely humiliate herself in front of 500 people just to keep her fragile claws sunk into the Sterling family fortune. She thought Vivian would commiserate with her. She thought Vivian viewed me as the exact same dirty, unwanted trash that she did. Brenda was about to experience the greatest shock of her life. Vivian completely ignored my mother. She did not even blink or turn her head in Brenda's direction. She and Darius walked right past my frantic, sobbing mother, as if she were absolutely nothing more than an invisible, annoying gust of wind. The sheer deliberate disrespect of being completely overlooked by the billionaire bride made Brenda gasp aloud, her hand flying to her pearl necklace in profound shock. Vivian stopped exactly 3 feet in front of me. The 2 police officers respectfully stepped aside, giving the heiress clear, unobstructed access to me. The heavy silence on the lawn was absolute. 500 guests strained their necks, completely desperate to hear the impending confrontation. They expected shouting. They expected security to violently intervene. They expected the wealthy bride to publicly destroy the crazed, uninvited wedding crasher. Instead, Vivian did the exact opposite. Vivian Sterling, the untouchable princess of Atlanta, high society, looked directly into my eyes and offered a slow, incredibly deep, and highly respectful nod. Her tense facial features softened slightly, revealing a profound sense of mutual understanding and undeniable corporate respect. The fierce intelligence shining in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. She had seen the heavily encrypted files. She had reviewed the complex, undeniable financial audits. She knew exactly who I was, and she knew exactly how much raw liquid power I commanded. I was no longer the abused, discarded sister. I was the billionaire apex predator who had successfully orchestrated the complete, systematic dismantling of the man she almost married. She respected the ruthless, brilliant game I had played, and she respected the fact that I had allowed her family to discover the truth. "Thank you for coming, Miss Simone," Vivian said, her voice clear, confident, and projecting perfectly across the silent, stunned audience. Please forgive the dramatic invitation, but your presence here today was absolutely mandatory. Her polite, respectful tone sent a massive visible shockwave through the crowd. Brenda let out a strangled, confused noise from behind us. Trey actually collapsed onto the steps of the altar, his knees giving out, as the terrifying reality of his situation finally crushed him. He realized that Vivian was not talking to a broke, delusional dropout. Vivian Sterling was formally addressing an equal. I offered Vivian a slight, gracious smile in return, tightening my grip on my heavy leather briefcase. The pleasantries were officially over. The brutal, merciless execution of my brother's fraudulent stolen empire was finally ready to begin right here on the pristine grass. Trey could no longer maintain his facade of the unbothered groom. The sight of his billionaire bride treating me with reverence shattered his ego. He pushed himself off the altar steps, his face twisting into pure desperation. He stormed down the white carpeted aisle, his expensive leather shoes stomping heavily on the delicate floral arrangements. His chest heaved as he closed the distance between us, his light skin flushed an angry red. "Vivian, what are you doing?" Trey shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "Why are you talking to her? I told you she is a drug-addicted dropout. She is a toxic mess who destroys everything she touches. She does not belong near us. Get away from her right now before she does something crazy." He lunged forward, abandoning the high society etiquette he spent years perfecting. In a horrifying display of aggressive entitlement, Trey reached out and violently grabbed Vivian by her bare arm. His fingers dug deeply into her skin as he tried to yank her away from me and pull her back toward the altar. It was an unforgivable mistake. You do not ever put your hands on a Sterling, especially not in front of her entire dynasty. "Let go of me," Vivian commanded, her voice dropping to a freezing register. Trey did not listen. He was too consumed by his terror, frantically trying to drag his human shield back to the safety of the officiant. "We need to finish the vows," Vivian Trey begged, his grip tightening aggressively on her arm. "Stop listening to her insane lies. We are getting married right now. The paperwork is signed. Walk back up there with me." Before Trey could pull her another inch, Darius moved with the terrifying speed of a trained predator. Darius lunged forward, his massive hand clamping down onto Trey's wrist with bone-crushing force. He twisted Trey's arm sharply, forcing my brother to instantly release his aggressive hold on the bride. Trey let out a sharp yelp of pain as Darius shoved him forcefully backward. Trey stumbled awkwardly over the hem of his custom trousers, falling onto the crushed rose petals. "Do not ever touch my cousin again." Darius growled, his voice a menacing rumble that resonated across the silent audience. "If you even look at her the wrong way, I will personally break every finger on that hand." Trey scrambled backward, rubbing his bruised wrist, his eyes darting frantically between Darius's imposing figure and Vivian's icy glare. He looked like a cornered rat, stripped of his arrogant charm. Vivian stood perfectly tall, adjusting the delicate lace sleeve of her custom couture gown where Trey had grabbed her. She did not look frightened. She looked utterly disgusted. She reached down and picked up her heavy, cascading bridal bouquet. It was a stunning arrangement of rare white orchids and heavy crystal accents. Vivian looked at Trey with a gaze so filled with pure contempt that it made the warm Atlanta air feel instantly freezing. "You really thought you could play us?" Vivian said softly, though her voice carried a sharp, deadly edge. "You thought you could walk into my family, smile your fake smile, and use my name to save your pathetic, worthless life. Vivian, please, you have to believe me." Trey pleaded, tears of genuine panic spilling from his eyes. "I love you. We belong together. She is just trying to ruin us because she is jealous." Vivian did not waste another breath on his pathetic lies. With a swift, powerful motion, she pulled her arm back and threw her heavy bridal bouquet directly at him. The dense floral arrangement struck Trey squarely in the center of his chest with a loud thud. The impact sent a shower of crushed white petals and broken green stems fluttering down over his pristine ivory tuxedo. Trey gasped, stumbling backward again from the sheer force of the throw. "Shut your mouth, you pathetic fraud!" Vivian spat, her furious voice echoing very loudly through the estate's massive speaker system. The entire congregation of 500 elite guests erupted in a collective horrified gasp. "You are not a tech genius, Trey Vivian," continued her voice booming from the surround sound speakers. "You are a desperate, broke, lying thief. You came into my home, sat at my father's dinner table, and lied to our faces. You thought we were just some gullible old money family who would not do our due diligence. You thought my father would blindly hand you a $50 million merger without looking under the hood of your fake crumbling company." Trey shook his head frantically, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "No, Vivian, the company is real. The merger is solid. We are going to be billionaires together. Just listen to me." Darius stepped forward, completely blocking Trey from taking another step toward Vivian. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a wireless microphone, signaling to the audio technician at the back of the pavilion. The low murmur of the shocked crowd instantly died down as Darius brought the microphone to his lips. The commanding presence of the lead corporate investigator demanded absolute silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," Darius announced, his deep, authoritative voice cutting through the humid afternoon air. "I deeply apologize for the disruption of today's events. However, on behalf of Winston Sterling and the entire Sterling family, I must officially announce that this wedding is permanently canceled." Another massive wave of shocked gasps swept through the audience. Brenda let out a loud, dramatic wail, burying her face in her hands, as her ultimate dream of high society dominance was publicly, ruthlessly executed. Darius did not pause. He looked directly at the wealthy guests, his expression serious and uncompromising. "The Sterling family requires absolute transparency and unquestionable integrity from anyone attempting to join our ranks. The man standing before you today has failed to meet those basic requirements. The groom Trey is currently under active, severe investigation for massive financial fraud." Trey let out a strangled, desperate noise, burying his hands in his hair. He looked wildly at Winston Sterling, who sat in the front row watching his daughter and nephew handle the situation with cold, calculating precision. Winston did not blink, nor did he offer a single ounce of sympathy. "During our mandatory corporate vetting process for the proposed prenuptial agreement," Darius continued, pacing slowly across the white-carpeted aisle, "my investigative team uncovered a massive web of deceit. The groom deliberately attempted to hide tens of millions of dollars in predatory underground debt. He intended to use Sterling capital to pay off his criminal debts." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The elite members of Atlanta society were looking at Trey, not with pity, but with profound, irreversible disgust. In their exclusive world, financial fraud and bringing criminal elements into their prestigious circles were the ultimate unforgivable sins. Trey was no longer the charming, handsome golden boy. He was a highly toxic liability, a dangerous con artist who had been completely exposed in the most public, humiliating way possible. "Please, you have to stop this," Trey sobbed, dropping to his knees on the ruined rose petals. "You are destroying my life. My business is real. I just need a little more time. I need the merger." "Your business is a complete ghost town," Trey Darius replied coldly, staring down at the pathetic weeping man. "You do not own any original code. You do not hold any valid operational patents. Every piece of technology you claim to have created is currently crashing and burning because you have absolutely no idea how it actually works. You are a fraud and your entire operation is bankrupt." I stood perfectly still, watching the absolute destruction of the brother who had made my life a living nightmare. Brenda could no longer handle the public humiliation. She pushed herself up from her chair, her face streaked with ruined, expensive makeup. She rushed toward Trey, ignoring the stern warnings of the police officers. She fell to her knees beside her golden child, wrapping her arms around him and glaring furiously at Vivian and Darius. "How dare you treat my son this way?" Brenda screamed, her voice shrill and completely devoid of any logic. "He is a brilliant entrepreneur. He is a good, righteous man. You elitist snobs think you can just step all over us. You are making up these lies because you look down on him. My son is going to be a titan in this city with or without your money." Darius looked at Brenda with an expression of pure pity. He shook his head slowly, raising the microphone once more. "Ma'am, your son is not a titan. Darius stated firmly, his voice echoing across the silent lawn. He is a criminal who is about to face severe legal consequences. And the truly remarkable part of this entire situation is that the very person he has been actively stealing from, the actual brilliant architect of the technology he claims to own, has been standing right here the entire time. The crowd shifted, all 500 pairs of eyes turning simultaneously to lock directly onto me. I stood perfectly tall in my sharp emerald suit, my grip incredibly firm on the heavy leather briefcase containing the undeniable, irrefutable truth. The incredibly powerful Sterling family had already torn down Trey's false walls, but I was about to absolutely deliver the final, devastating blow that would completely obliterate what remained of his stolen empire. I sat calmly in the back seat, taking one final deep breath before the doors unlocked. Through the tinted window, I could clearly see the lavish altar constructed at the far end of the property. Towering arches of imported white orchids framed the extravagant stage. Standing there, bathed in the afternoon sunlight, was my brother Trey. He was wearing a custom-tailored ivory tuxedo, looking every bit the wealthy, successful tech titan he pretended to be. Beside him stood Vivian Sterling, radiating absolute power and elegance, in a breathtaking custom couture bridal gown that easily cost a fortune. Just a few feet away, Winston Sterling sat in the front row, his posture rigid, his face an unreadable mask of cold, calculated authority. The atmosphere was thick with suffocating tension. The wedding ceremony had been halted mere seconds before the official exchanging of the sacred vows. The taller police officer quickly stepped out of the vehicle, marching around to the rear passenger side. He opened my door and respectfully extended his hand to assist me. I ignored his hand, stepping out of the cruiser with my head held high, my posture radiating complete, undeniable confidence. The vibrant, sharp emerald silk of my designer suit immediately caught the sunlight. I adjusted my grip on my heavy leather briefcase, the silver clasps gleaming brightly. A collective audible gasp rippled through the seated congregation. Hundreds of wealthy guests leaned forward, whispering frantically to one another, completely desperate to understand why a police escort had just delivered a woman to the center of the wedding aisle. I kept my eyes locked dead ahead, staring directly at the grand altar. The illusion of my family's perfect high society triumph was about to be violently torn apart. Trey saw me immediately. From 50 yards away, I watched the arrogant, triumphant smirk completely vanish from his handsome face. All the color rapidly drained from his light skin, leaving him looking like a terrified, cornered animal. His broad shoulders instantly slumped, and his hands began to visibly tremble at his sides. He frantically looked around the altar, his eyes darting wildly between his stunning bride, his powerful soon-to-be father-in-law, and the police officers flanking me. He was desperately trying to calculate how his supposedly broken, drug-addicted failure of a sister had managed to escape her fabricated rehabilitation center. He had no idea how I had bypassed his elaborate web of lies to stand proudly on the very lawn he thought he had conquered. His fraudulent, meticulously crafted world was rapidly collapsing right before his very eyes. Then the true chaos finally erupted. Sitting prominently in the front row, wearing an absurdly extravagant, heavily feathered fascinator hat that she absolutely could not afford, was my mother. Brenda had been basking in the glorious, intoxicating attention of the wealthy guests all afternoon. When she finally registered my presence, her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The very sight of my dark skin and natural hair standing confidently in her elite space triggered a vicious, uncontrollable panic inside her. She completely abandoned all pretense of high society decorum. She violently pushed her chair back, ignoring the startled gasps of the wealthy matriarchs sitting right beside her. She aggressively hiked up the skirt of her expensive, unpaid-for-designer gown and began charging furiously down the white carpeted aisle directly toward me. Her eyes were wide with genuine desperate terror. "Arrest her right now!" Brenda shrieked at the top of her lungs, her shrill voice echoing terribly across the manicured lawn and completely ruining the elegant ambiance. "She is entirely unhinged. She is a dangerous, unstable addict. Get this absolute embarrassment out of here immediately." She pointed a shaking manicured finger directly at my face, frantically waving at the two uniformed officers. She does not belong here. She is completely obsessed with ruining her brother. She escaped her treatment facility. Take her away before she violently attacks someone. Her desperate, wildly fabricated lies poured out of her mouth like toxic venom. She was entirely willing to have her own flesh and blood violently tackled and thrown into the back of a police cruiser just to preserve the fake, glittering image she had sold to the powerful Sterling family. She wanted me erased. I did not flinch. I did not step back, and I absolutely did not lower my gaze. I stood my ground, my expression as cold and unforgiving as solid ice. The two police officers immediately stepped forward, placing themselves directly between me and my frantic, screaming mother. The taller officer firmly placed his hand on his heavy-duty belt, his stance shifting into a defensive, authoritative command position. "Ma'am, you need to step back immediately." The officer warned, his loud, booming voice effortlessly cutting through Brenda's hysterical, ear-piercing shrieks. "Do not take another step toward this woman. We are operating under strict direct orders to ensure her absolute safety and protection. Back away now, or you will be physically restrained." The severe, uncompromising threat of actual arrest finally pierced through Brenda's blind, furious panic. She stopped abruptly in the middle of the aisle. Brenda stood paralyzed, her chest heaving heavily as she looked wildly between the stern police officers and my calm, deeply amused face. The wealthy guests seated around her were openly staring in absolute horror and profound disgust. The elegant, sophisticated mother of the groom was throwing a massive, undignified temper tantrum like a spoiled child. Her coveted social standing within the elite church circles and the prestigious country clubs was rapidly evaporating with every passing second. She turned her desperate, pleading eyes toward the altar, looking for Trey to somehow salvage the catastrophic situation. Trey, however, was completely frozen in place. He looked absolutely sick, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. He knew this was not a simple misunderstanding. He instinctively recognized that my confident, unapologetic presence here meant that his darkest, most heavily guarded secrets were no longer safe. Trey frantically grabbed Vivian's arm, his grip tight and desperate. "Vivian, baby, please do not look at her," he pleaded, his voice cracking pathetically over the silent crowd. "She is deeply unwell. She is just having a severe manic episode. Let the police drag her away so we can finally finish our beautiful vows. I am so incredibly sorry for this insane disruption." He tried to physically pull Vivian back toward the officiant, desperately attempting to force the ceremony to continue, despite the glaring, undeniable reality unfolding right in front of them. He needed her to say "I do" before the truth could completely destroy him. He needed that legal binding marriage certificate to shield him from the violent creditors hunting him down. He thought he could still control the narrative. He thought Vivian was just a naive, trusting bride. Vivian Sterling did not panic. She did not cry, and she certainly did not look at Trey with any bridal affection. She slowly turned her head, her beautiful, highly intelligent eyes locking onto Trey's frantic, sweating face. With a swift, incredibly sharp motion, she violently yanked her arm out of his desperate grip. She looked at him with a level of profound, chilling disgust that made my own heart race with sheer satisfaction. She did not utter a single word to him. Instead, Vivian elegantly gathered the heavy, voluminous layers of her custom couture gown. With absolute, undeniable regal authority, she slowly stepped down from the elevated flower-covered altar. The entire audience held their collective breath, watching the billionaire heiress abandon her own wedding ceremony with striking, terrifying grace. She was a woman completely in control of her domain. Moving perfectly in sync beside her was Darius, her imposing, broad-shouldered cousin. Darius was not just family, he was the Sterling Empire's lead corporate investigator. He was the ruthless, brilliant mind responsible for aggressively vetting every single business deal and every single person who attempted to enter their exclusive inner circle. He walked with a dark, predatory grace, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd before locking dead onto me. He carried a thick, leather-bound folio under his muscular arm. Together, Vivian and Darius walked slowly down the white carpeted aisle, leaving a completely broken, hyperventilating Trey standing alone at the altar. They moved with absolute synchronized purpose, heading straight toward the center of the lawn where I stood waiting. The power dynamic in the sprawling estate had completely irrevocably shifted, and every single guest present could feel it. As Vivian and Darius approached, Brenda mistakenly believed they were coming to support her. "Oh, Vivian, sweetheart, I am so deeply sorry," Brenda cried out, attempting to reach out and touch the bride's expensive lace sleeve. "My deeply troubled daughter has ruined your perfect day. Please let security throw her out. We will pay for all the damages, I promise you." Trey is just as horrified as we are. Brenda's desperate groveling attempts to salvage her proximity to wealth were genuinely pathetic to witness. She was willing to completely humiliate herself in front of 500 people just to keep her fragile claws sunk into the Sterling family fortune. She thought Vivian would commiserate with her. She thought Vivian viewed me as the exact same dirty, unwanted trash that she did. Brenda was about to experience the greatest shock of her life. Vivian completely ignored my mother. She did not even blink or turn her head in Brenda's direction. She and Darius walked right past my frantic, sobbing mother, as if she were absolutely nothing more than an invisible, annoying gust of wind. The sheer deliberate disrespect of being completely overlooked by the billionaire bride made Brenda gasp aloud, her hand flying to her pearl necklace in profound shock. Vivian stopped exactly 3 feet in front of me. The two police officers respectfully stepped aside, giving the heiress clear, unobstructed access to me. The heavy silence on the lawn was absolute. 500 guests strained their necks, completely desperate to hear the impending confrontation. They expected shouting. They expected security to violently intervene. They expected the wealthy bride to publicly destroy the crazed, uninvited wedding crasher. Instead, Vivian did the exact opposite. Vivian Sterling, the untouchable princess of Atlanta high society, looked directly into my eyes and offered a slow, incredibly deep, and highly respectful nod. Her tense facial features softened slightly, revealing a profound sense of mutual understanding and undeniable corporate respect. The fierce intelligence shining in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. She had seen the heavily encrypted files. She had reviewed the complex, undeniable financial audits. She knew exactly who I was, and she knew exactly how much raw, liquid power I commanded. I was no longer the abused, discarded sister. I was the billionaire apex predator who had successfully orchestrated the complete systematic dismantling of the man she almost married. She respected the ruthless, brilliant game I had played, and she respected the fact that I had allowed her family to discover the truth. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Simone," Vivian said, her voice clear, confident, and projecting perfectly across the silent, stunned audience. "Please forgive the dramatic invitation, but your presence here today was absolutely mandatory." Her polite, respectful tone sent a massive, visible shockwave through the crowd. Brenda let out a strangled, confused noise from behind us. Trey actually collapsed onto the steps of the altar, his knees giving out as the terrifying reality of his situation finally crushed him. He realized that Vivian was not talking to a broke, delusional dropout. Vivian Sterling was formally addressing an equal. I offered Vivian a slight, gracious smile in return, tightening my grip on my heavy leather briefcase. The pleasantries were officially over. The brutal, merciless execution of my brother's fraudulent, stolen empire was finally ready to begin right here on the pristine grass. Winston Sterling rose slowly from his velvet chair in the front row. The patriarch of the Sterling dynasty moved with a terrifying, calculated precision that commanded absolute silence. As he walked toward the center of the manicured lawn, the sheer weight of his presence seemed to drop the temperature in the pavilion. He bypassed his daughter and his lead investigator, coming to a halt directly beside me. He did not look at my mother, who was still kneeling pathetically on the grass, and he did not immediately look at Trey. Winston simply extended his hand, taking the wireless microphone from Darius. The billionaire patriarch then turned his piercing, analytical gaze upon me. There was no pity in his eyes, only the deep, unspoken respect shared between two apex predators who recognized each other's undeniable power. With a slow, deliberate motion, Winston held the microphone out to me. The collective gasp that erupted from the 500 elite guests was deafening. Whispers swept through the rows of politicians, media moguls, and high society matriarchs. They were witnessing a legendary transfer of authority. Winston Sterling was not just handing me a microphone, he was officially handing me the floor, validating my power in front of the most influential people in Atlanta. I accepted the microphone, my grip firm and steady. I turned my attention to the altar. Trey looked as though the very blood had been siphoned from his veins. His light skin had turned a sickly translucent shade of gray. His jaw hung slack, his chest heaving with shallow, panicked breaths. He was staring at the microphone in my hand as if it were a loaded weapon aimed directly at his chest. He knew exactly what I was about to do, and he was completely powerless to stop it. I stepped forward, my emerald silk suit catching the afternoon sun. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell. I spoke with a calm, freezing authority that echoed flawlessly through the estate's massive surround sound system. 7 years ago, my mother violently threw me out of her home into a freezing rainstorm. I began, my voice ringing out with crystal clarity. She called me a failure. She called me a delusional, jealous dropout who was trying to ruin the flawless reputation of her golden son. She told me I would amount to absolutely nothing. She sacrificed my safety, my dignity, and my future, and all to protect the pristine image of the man standing before you today. I paused, letting the heavy truth settle over the stunned congregation. Brenda let out a soft, whimpering moan from the grass, but I did not spare her a single glance. I kept my eyes locked entirely on Trey. But what my mother did not know, and what Trey desperately tried to hide from the world, was why I was truly cast out. I was not thrown away because I was a failure. I was discarded because I was a threat. I possessed the undeniable proof that Trey was a desperate, thieving fraud. I walked slowly toward the elaborate audio-visual control station set up near the edge of the pavilion. The technicians, clearly briefed by Darius beforehand, stepped aside respectfully. I placed my heavy leather briefcase onto the pristine white table. The crisp, sharp click of the silver clasps snapping open echoed loudly through the silent lawn. I reached inside and pulled out my encrypted tablet along with a specialized biometric decryption drive. I connected the drive directly into the main presentation console. The massive high-definition LED screens flanking the beautiful floral altar had previously been displaying a romantic, carefully curated slideshow of Trey and Vivian's fake courtship. With one swift tap on my tablet, those romantic images instantly vanished. The screens went pitch black for a split second before bursting back to life with a blinding, undeniable display of raw, irrefutable data. Rows upon rows of complex, heavily encrypted source code cascaded down the massive screens. Alongside the code, stark official legal documents appeared in crisp high resolution. They were certified, internationally recognized patents from the United States Patent and Trademark Office. The documents displayed complex architectural diagrams for a revolutionary financial security algorithm. The elite business leaders in the audience instantly sat up straighter, their sharp eyes recognizing the formatting of top-tier billion-dollar intellectual property. "Look closely at the dates on those patents," I commanded, my voice projecting with lethal precision. "Look at the original filing timestamps on the foundational source code." The massive screens zoomed in, highlighting the indisputable timestamps. They were dated exactly 7 years ago. 7 years ago, while I was surviving on cheap coffee and practically living in my university library, I built a revolutionary financial encryption algorithm. I explained, pacing slowly back toward the center of the aisle. It was a dynamic, self-learning defensive architecture designed to protect institutional wealth from the most aggressive cyber attacks. It was brilliant. But it was still just a prototype. It was my masterpiece. I stopped pacing and locked eyes with my brother. His entire body was shaking now. He looked like he was about to physically collapse under the crushing weight of his exposed lies. Trey was drowning in massive, violent underground gambling debts. I continued, making sure every single guest heard the word gambling. He owed millions to highly dangerous, predatory lenders. He was desperate. So he used a spare key, sneaked into my dormitory like a common thief, and stole my physical hard drive. He locked me out of my own cloud storage, took my unfinished prototype, and presented it to a naive angel investor as his own genius invention. He used my stolen life's work to pay off his criminal debts and launch his supposedly brilliant corporate empire. The gasps from the audience were continuous now. The wealthy matriarchs were clutching their pearls. The corporate executives were shaking their heads in absolute disgust. Trey had committed the ultimate cardinal sin in their world. He was not just a liar, he was an intellectual thief who stole from his own blood. Trey named his fake company Nexus. I said the name dropping like a heavy stone. He spent the last 7 years parading around Atlanta wearing custom Italian suits, attending your exclusive country club dinners, and pretending to be a self-made tech titan. He aggressively courted the Sterling family, desperate to secure a $50 million merger to save his sinking ship. But Trey made one catastrophic, fatal mistake. I took a step closer to the altar. Trey shrank back, terrified. Trey is a smooth-talking salesman, not a software developer. I stated, my tone dripping with absolute freezing contempt. He stole a prototype, an unfinished draft. He had absolutely no idea how to properly update the complex architecture. He had no idea how to patch the massive security vulnerabilities that inevitably arise when scaling a global financial platform. As Nexus took on bigger, more demanding corporate clients, the stolen software began to violently buckle under the pressure. His system has been experiencing massive catastrophic data leaks for the past 8 months. His company is entirely bankrupt, running on fumes, lies, and desperate predatory loans. Trey shook his head frantically, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched whine. No, that is a lie. Nexus is perfectly fine. The code is flawless. You are just trying to ruin my merger. I did not raise my voice, but my words hit him with the force of a freight train. The company you have been parading around, Trey, is a completely broken, pirated version of an algorithm I built 7 years ago. I paused, letting the devastating truth sink deep into his bones. While you were busy playing dress-up and buying expensive cars to impress high society, I spent the last 7 years rebuilding my stolen code from scratch. I made it 10 times stronger, completely unbreakable and infinitely more powerful. I tapped my tablet again. The massive screens shifted, displaying the sleek, intimidating corporate logo of Aegis Financial Security. It was a name every single wealthy investor in the audience instantly recognized. It was the most dominant, secretive, and powerful financial technology firm on the entire Eastern Seaboard. The true multi-billion-dollar parent company that has been quietly, systematically taking over all of your competitors. I delivered the absolute verbal kill shot, belongs entirely to me. The pavilion erupted into absolute unbridled chaos. The sheer magnitude of the revelation sent shockwaves through the elite crowd. The anonymous whale investor, the secretive billionaire who had been aggressively dominating the corporate tech sector, was the very woman standing before them in the emerald suit. The woman who had been cruelly excluded from the wedding. The woman who was supposedly rotting away in a rehabilitation facility. Trey let out a guttural, agonizing cry of pure defeat. He fell completely forward, his hands clutching his head as he collapsed against the bottom step of the floral altar. He realized with terrifying clarity that he had never been the one in control. For 7 years, he thought he had successfully buried me. He thought he had outsmarted everyone. He never realized that I was the invisible predator slowly tightening the net around his throat. I was the one who bought his failing competitors. I was the one who choked off his revenue streams. I was the one who laid the complex financial breadcrumbs for Darius and the Sterling investigators to find. I orchestrated his complete and total annihilation. Brenda let out a sharp, hysterical scream from the grass. She scrambled to her feet, her expensive feathered hat sitting crookedly on her head. She looked at the massive screens displaying my billion-dollar corporate empire, and then she looked at me. The realization of what she had thrown away, the absolute staggering wealth and power she had violently rejected in favor of a pathetic fraud, finally registered in her desperate status-obsessed mind. I stood tall, feeling an immense, profound sense of absolute liberation. I had not needed to yell or scream. I had simply presented the cold, hard, irrefutable data. The smoking gun was fully displayed for the entire world to see. I had successfully reclaimed my stolen legacy, stripped my brother of his fraudulent armor, and publicly executed the toxic illusion my family had worshipped for decades. But the true absolute devastation was far from over. I had one more massive, horrifying secret to reveal, a final, sickening layer of calculated betrayal that would absolutely ensure my brother never saw the outside of a federal prison cell for the rest of his miserable life. The ultimate trap was perfectly sprung. But I still held the heaviest ammunition. I turned my attention back to my encrypted tablet resting on the presentation console. My fingers glided across the smooth glass surface. With one deliberate swipe, the glowing logo of my corporate empire vanished from the towering screens. In its place, a series of dark, heavily redacted, and deeply disturbing financial documents materialized. They were not glossy corporate reports or pristine patent filings. They were scanned copies of crumpled, desperate promissory notes. The stark black ink revealed exorbitant illegal interest rates and terms that screamed of the criminal underworld. The elite guests in the pavilion leaned forward, their eyes squinting at the screens in collective confusion. These were not documents from a legitimate bank. These were contracts written by violent men who operated in the dangerous, blood-soaked shadows of Atlanta. Trey let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. He scrambled backward on the crushed white rose petals, his hands frantically gripping the fabric of his ruined ivory tuxedo. He recognized the documents instantly. He knew exactly what they meant. His eyes darted toward the estate's heavy iron gates, as if expecting a convoy of armed thugs to storm the lawn and drag him away. I picked up the microphone, my voice slicing through the heavy, humid Georgia air with lethal precision. You thought stealing my code was the extent of your betrayal, Trey. You thought taking my life's work and leaving me homeless in a rainstorm was your greatest sin. But you and I both know that was only the beginning of your absolute depravity. I pointed directly at the massive screens. These documents are promissory notes from three of the most ruthless, violent, predatory lending syndicates operating on the East Coast. When your fake tech company began hemorrhaging money, when your massive gambling addiction completely spiraled out of control, legitimate banks refused to give you a single dime. You were bleeding cash, desperate to maintain your wealthy facade for the Sterling family. So you went to the loan sharks. You borrowed $10 million in illegal high-interest loans just to keep your pathetic illusion alive. A wave of horrified murmurs swept through the 500 guests. Winston Sterling stood perfectly still, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscles fluttered beneath his skin. Bringing criminal debt into his sphere was a direct threat to his entire dynasty. But violent criminals do not just hand over $10 million based on a charming smile. I continued taking slow, measured steps down the white-carpeted aisle toward my cowering brother. They require collateral. They require an ironclad guarantor. They demand a name they can violently hunt down if the payments stop. And since you owned absolutely nothing of real value, since your entire life was a hollow, fabricated lie, you needed a scapegoat. I tapped my tablet one final time. The screen zoomed in dramatically on the signature lines of the dirty promissory notes. There, scrawled in bold black ink, was my full legal name. The gasps from the audience were visceral. Brenda, who was still kneeling pathetically on the grass, stared at the screens with her mouth hanging wide open. You did not just steal my software, Trey. I projected my voice, ensuring every single syllable struck him like a physical blow. You systematically forged my signature on $10 million worth of illegal predatory debt. You used my stolen identity to secure your criminal loans. Trey covered his face with his hands, weeping openly, entirely stripped of his dignity. Please, Simone, please stop. He begged, his voice muffled and pathetic. I was going to pay it back. I swear I was going to fix it. I completely ignored his pathetic pleas. You deliberately set me up to be hunted, I stated, my tone devoid of any mercy or sibling affection. You knew exactly what those violent men do to people who default on their debts. You intended to let ruthless loan sharks track me down and physically destroy me. And if the authorities found the fraudulent paperwork first, you fully intended to let me take the fall. You were perfectly willing to let your own sister rot in a federal prison for decades, bearing the weight of your massive financial crimes. I turned to look directly at Vivian Sterling. She stood like a marble statue, her expression radiating a chilling, terrifying clarity. She now understood the full, horrifying scope of the man she had almost married. "Your entire plan was beautifully evil," I said, addressing the crowd, but keeping my eyes locked on Trey. "You plan to stand at this grand altar, say your vows, and secure a $50 million merger from Winston Sterling. You were going to use the Sterling family's pristine generational wealth to quietly pay off your $10 million criminal debt, wiping your slate completely clean. You thought you could seamlessly transition into high society, leaving me to be slaughtered by your demons in the dark." The sheer, unadulterated evil of his plan hung over the pristine lawn. It was one thing to be a greedy opportunist, it was entirely another to coldly calculate the physical demise of your own flesh and blood for personal financial gain. Winston Sterling looked at Trey with a gaze so lethal it could have frozen boiling water. Darius signaled subtly to his private security team, who immediately began forming a tight, impenetrable perimeter around the altar, trapping my brother completely. Vivian Sterling moved. She did not rush and she did not shout. She walked toward Trey with a slow, deliberate, and terrifying grace. The heavy layers of her custom couture gown rustled softly against the crushed rose petals. She stopped right in front of him. Trey remained on his knees, looking up at her with red, swollen eyes. He reached out a trembling hand, desperately hoping her elite upbringing would compel her to show mercy. "Vivian, baby?" He whimpered, choking on his own tears. "I did it for us. I needed the money so I could give you the perfect life. I love you. Please do not let them do this to me." Vivian looked down at him. Her face was a masterclass in absolute freezing contempt. She did not see a handsome groom. She saw a repulsive, dangerous parasite who had tried to infect her sacred family lineage. With a sudden, explosive motion that no one anticipated, Vivian drew her arm back and delivered a staggering, open-handed slap directly across Trey's face. The sharp, violent crack of her palm striking his cheek echoed like a gunshot through the silent estate. The sheer force of the blow snapped Trey's head violently to the side. He collapsed entirely onto the grass, clutching his reddened face in absolute shock. "You thought you could use my family's money to pay off your criminal debts and let your own sister rot in a cell," Vivian said, her voice radiating pure, unbridled fury. She stood over him, her chest heaving with righteous anger. "You thought you could bring the violent criminal underworld to my father's doorstep. You thought my legacy, my name, was just a convenient bank account to clean up your disgusting, fraudulent messes." Trey scrambled backward on his elbows, whimpering like a wounded animal. Vivian stepped forward, closing the distance instantly, refusing to let him retreat. "You are the most despicable, cowardly excuse for a man I have ever encountered." Vivian continued her words, cutting through the humid air like shattered glass. "You sacrificed the very sister who built your only valuable asset. You threw her to the wolves to save your own pathetic skin. You are not a genius. You are not a titan. You are a disgusting, bottom-feeding fraud who tried to use my dynasty as your personal shield." The elite congregation watched in stunned awe as the beautiful heiress completely dismantled the man she had loved just an hour prior. There was no sadness in her eyes. There was only the ruthless protective instinct of a woman fiercely defending her family's empire from a lethal threat. I stood nearby observing the glorious execution of his character. I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. My brother had always relied on his light skin, his charming smile, and his manipulative words to escape accountability. He had coasted through life believing he was untouchable, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. Now stripped of his stolen assets, exposed as a criminal, and violently rejected by the very billionaire heiress he sought to exploit, he had absolutely nowhere left to hide. Brenda was still kneeling on the grass a few feet away. She was trembling violently, her hands covering her mouth in sheer horror. She had watched her golden boy be physically struck and verbally annihilated by the most powerful woman in Atlanta. The social standing she had worshipped her entire life was completely, permanently eradicated. She could no longer pretend Trey was a victim. She could no longer blame me for his failures. The undeniable proof of his $10 million forgery was currently burning bright on the massive screens above her head. I looked at my mother, feeling absolutely no pity. She had chosen her path 7 years ago when she threw my belongings into the freezing rain and told me I was dead to her. She had chosen to protect a monster. Now she was going to face the brutal, uncompromising reality of her choices. The sirens that had been quieted earlier suddenly roared back to life, but this time they were not my police escort. The wailing sound grew louder, multiplying as multiple heavy vehicles approached the grand estate. Winston Sterling had not just canceled the wedding. He had initiated a full-scale legal and criminal reckoning. Darius stepped forward, his massive frame towering over Trey's trembling body. He looked at the disgraced groom with absolute disgust. The private security team closed the circle, ensuring Trey could not make a desperate run for the surrounding woods. Vivian turned away from Trey, effectively dismissing his entire existence. She walked back toward me, her posture instantly shifting from furious vengeance back to elegant composure. She stopped beside me, looking up at the glowing screens displaying my stolen patents and the forged loan documents. "Miss Simone Vivian," said her voice dropping to a respectful, professional volume. "My family deeply apologizes for almost funding the man who tried to destroy you. We pride ourselves on knowing exactly who we do business with, and we clearly missed the true genius in the room." I nodded slowly, accepting her apology with the grace of an equal. "You caught the discrepancy before the ink dried, Vivian. That is what matters. You protected your empire and I protected mine." We stood side by side, two powerful, highly intelligent black women, completely united in the destruction of a toxic, manipulative fraud. The era of Trey's deception was officially over. The smoking gun had delivered its fatal blow, leaving nothing but the charred remains of his fake legacy. But as the flashing red and blue lights of the approaching financial crimes unit illuminated the grand pavilion, I knew the final, most satisfying act of my vengeance was still waiting to be delivered. Brenda was about to experience her own devastating judgment, and I was going to completely scorch the earth. The flashing lights of the approaching police vehicles painted the entire pavilion in stark shades of red and blue. The reality of my immense wealth was finally registering in my mother's status-obsessed brain. Brenda slowly pulled her gaze away from Trey, who was now weeping pathetically on the ground surrounded by Sterling security guards. She looked back up at the towering LED screens, her eyes scanning the multi-billion-dollar valuation of Aegis Financial Security. I could practically see the gears violently grinding inside her head. Her golden boy was a confirmed criminal headed straight for federal prison, but standing right in front of her was an actual legitimate billionaire, her own daughter. In a sickening, instantaneous display of absolute hypocrisy, Brenda completely changed her entire demeanor. She wiped the smeared mascara from her cheeks, adjusted her expensive feathered fascinator, and forced a bright, trembling smile onto her face. The frantic, screaming woman who had just demanded my arrest suddenly vanished. In her place was a bizarre, terrifying caricature of a loving, deeply proud mother. Brenda walked towards me with her arms outstretched, her eyes brimming with fresh, completely fabricated tears. She pushed past a stunned state senator and stepped onto the white-carpeted aisle. My brilliant daughter Brenda cried out, her voice dripping with an artificial, sugary sweetness that made my stomach physically churn. "Oh, Simone, my beautiful, brilliant girl. I always knew you were an absolute genius. I always knew you were destined to conquer the world." The sheer audacity of her performance was breathtaking. The 500 elite guests who had just watched her demand my violent removal stared at her in profound, disgusted disbelief. Brenda ignored their stares entirely. She was completely laser-focused on the incredible wealth standing before her. She honestly believed she could simply pivot and claim her rightful place as the matriarch of a billion-dollar empire. "Come here and hug your mother," Brenda wept, taking another eager step toward me. "I knew you could achieve greatness. I was only tough on you to motivate you. I had to push you out of the nest so you could learn to fly. I had to show you the harsh reality of the world so you would build this incredible company. Every strict thing I ever did was purely out of deep maternal love." We are going to rule this city together, Simone. Just you and me. As she reached out to grab my shoulders, I took a sharp, deliberate step backward. I raised my hand, stopping her dead in her tracks. The look of absolute freezing disgust on my face made her drop her arms instantly. "Do not ever try to touch me again," I commanded, my voice devoid of any warmth or forgiveness. "You do not get to claim my success. You do not get to rewrite history to excuse your monstrous behavior. You threw me out into a freezing rainstorm to protect a thief. You told me I was dead to you." Brenda blinked rapidly, her fake smile faltering for a brief second before she desperately tried to force it back. "Simone, sweetheart, you are just emotional. Family fights happen, but we share the same blood. We belong together in these elite circles. Look at what you have accomplished. I am so incredibly proud." I shook my head slowly, feeling nothing but cold, clinical detachment. "You are not proud of me, Brenda. You are simply calculating how my bank account can salvage your ruined social standing. You love the idea of a billionaire daughter, but you have always despised me. And I am going to prove it to every single person standing in this pavilion." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I looked over at the audio-visual technicians manning the massive soundboard near the stage. They had been watching the entire spectacle with wide eyes. I caught the lead technician's gaze and gave him a firm nod. He immediately patched my device directly into the estate's towering concert-grade speakers. Winston Sterling stood silently watching me, his arms crossed over his chest. Vivian remained by my side, her expression completely unreadable as she waited for my next move. The elite congregation held their collective breath, sensing that the ultimate destruction of Brenda's carefully curated facade was imminent. "You see, my mother is a master of public relations," I announced to the silent crowd, my voice echoing powerfully across the manicured lawn. "She spends her entire life curating an image of perfection for her church council, her exclusive country clubs, and her wealthy friends. She portrays herself as a loving, pious woman who raised successful, brilliant children. But behind closed doors, she is a cruel, colorless monster who actively punished me for simply existing with dark skin and natural hair. She worshipped Trey because his light skin and loose curls fit her toxic, deeply ingrained prejudices." Brenda let out a short, panicked gasp. "Simone, stop this nonsense right now. You are humiliating us in front of the Sterlings." "I am not humiliating you," I replied coldly. "I am simply letting you speak for yourself." I tapped the screen of my phone, navigating directly to the audio files I had meticulously saved that very morning. I pressed play on the first voice memo, a direct recording of the family group chat voice messages Trey and Brenda had sent me when I asked for a simple ride from the airport. The crisp, undeniable sound of my mother's voice boomed from the massive speakers, completely filling the sprawling estate. The audio was pristine, capturing every single inflection of her vicious, sneering tone. "Honestly, Simone, do not even bother coming around this weekend." My brother's recorded voice echoed, first filled with aggressive venom. "Your broke, pitiful aesthetic is going to completely embarrass me in front of the Sterling family. You showing up looking like a desperate charity case is the biggest embarrassment of my life." Then came Brenda's voice. The entire crowd flinched as her cruel, unmistakable tone blasted through the air. "Trey is absolutely right," the recorded Brenda snapped harshly. "I already told Vivian's parents that you are out of state in a rehabilitation center." It was the only acceptable way to explain why my dark-skinned daughter is such a massive failure compared to her handsome brother. "I cannot have you standing next to the Sterlings in the wedding photos. Your dark skin and your messy, nappy hair will completely ruin the elegant aesthetic we have worked so hard to build. You always look like the help, Simone. Do not ruin this incredible opportunity for your brother. Just stay hidden in your little apartment and stay far away from the estate. You are a disgusting embarrassment to my legacy." The audio file ended with a sharp, heavy click. The silence that descended upon the pavilion was absolute, thick, and physically suffocating. The elite guests, many of whom were prominent Black leaders, civil rights attorneys, and respected university alumni, stared at Brenda with open, unadulterated horror. In their highly educated progressive circles, blatant colorism and the vicious degradation of a dark-skinned black woman by her own mother was considered the ultimate most unforgivable sin. The sheer toxicity of her words, the disgusting references to my skin tone, and my natural hair completely stripped away her mask of religious piety and high society grace. Brenda stood frozen in the center of the aisle, her face drained of all color. She looked exactly like a deer caught in the blinding headlights of an approaching freight train. Her perfectly manicured hands were shaking violently. She looked around the crowd, desperately searching for a single friendly face, a single person who might offer her a shred of sympathy. She found absolutely nothing. The wealthy matriarchs of her church council, the women she had spent decades trying to impress, were actively turning their backs on her. They whispered to one another behind raised hands, their eyes filled with profound disgust. A prominent female judge sitting in the second row actually scoffed aloud, shaking her head in sheer disbelief at the recorded cruelty. "That was not me," Brenda stammered weakly, her voice trembling as she frantically tried to backtrack. "It was taken out of context. I was angry. I did not mean those terrible things. Simone, tell them I was just upset. Tell them I love you." I stared at her, my expression as hard and unyielding as granite. "You meant every single syllable, Brenda. You have spoken to me that way for my entire life. You locked me in the shadows because you were ashamed of my dark skin, and you propped Trey up on a golden pedestal because he looked the part. You sold your own daughter to protect your fragile, pathetic ego." I took a step closer, forcing her to look directly into my eyes. "The woman you called a dark-skinned embarrassment? The woman you told the world was a drug-addicted failure is the very same woman who just bought out the entire board of your precious country club. The woman you told to stay hidden is the one sitting at the head of a billion-dollar table. You threw away a diamond to protect a worthless piece of glass, and now you have absolutely nothing to show for it." Brenda let out a loud, agonizing sob, finally realizing the inescapable permanence of her destruction. The high society world she had sacrificed everything to conquer was currently locking its doors against her, forever. Winston Sterling stepped forward, his intense, powerful gaze locking onto my weeping mother. "You have disgraced this estate," Winston stated, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that carried across the quiet lawn. "You have brought fraud, deceit, and profound hatred into my family's presence. The Sterling family does not associate with criminals, and we certainly do not associate with bigots who abuse their own children. You are entirely unwelcome here." Vivian nodded firmly in agreement, stepping closer to me in a powerful display of solidarity. "Your presence here is highly offensive," Vivian added coldly. "You thought you could manipulate my family just like you manipulated your brilliant daughter. You thought you were gaining an empire today. Instead, you have successfully orchestrated your own complete and total ruin." Brenda fell to her knees on the white carpeted aisle, her expensive designer gown bunching up around her legs. She was sobbing hysterically now, loudly begging for forgiveness from the Sterling family, from the church elders, and finally from me. But her tears were entirely meaningless. They were the desperate, pathetic tears of a narcissist who had finally been trapped by her own venomous reflection. I looked down at the woman who had caused me so much profound pain, feeling no sorrow, no anger, and no lingering attachment. She was just a stranger kneeling on the grass, completely broken by her own toxic vanity. The trap had closed flawlessly and her judgment was absolute. I looked down at the woman who had caused me so much profound pain, feeling no sorrow, no anger, and no lingering attachment. She was just a stranger kneeling on the grass, completely broken by her own toxic vanity. The trap had closed flawlessly, and her judgment was absolute. But I was not finished. The final nail in the coffin of her fraudulent existence had yet to be hammered into place. I stepped closer to Brenda, ensuring my voice would carry over her pathetic theatrical sobbing. "You are crying over your lost social standing," I said, my tone as sharp as a newly honed blade. "You are weeping because these wealthy guests have turned their backs on you. You think public humiliation is the worst consequence you will face today. You are entirely wrong, Brenda. The nightmare you are about to experience goes much deeper than losing your prestigious seat at the country club luncheon." Brenda slowly looked up at me. The heavy layers of expensive foundation and setting powder on her face were completely ruined by her frantic tears. She looked exhausted, terrified, and utterly confused. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, her voice cracking as she clutched the delicate fabric of her designer gown. "You have already humiliated us. What else could you possibly want? I want you to understand exactly how your golden boy financed this luxurious illusion," I replied, gesturing toward Trey, who was still cowering on the crushed rose petals under the watchful eyes of the Sterling security team. You see, when Trey was desperately bleeding cash when his dangerous underground loans were not enough to sustain his extravagant lifestyle, he desperately needed more capital. He needed clean, legitimate assets to leverage. I opened my leather briefcase one last time. I pulled out a thick stack of certified bank documents securely bound by a heavy silver clip. I dropped the massive stack directly onto the grass right in front of Brenda's trembling knees. "Look at them," I commanded. Brenda hesitated, her hands shaking violently as she reached for the legal papers. She flipped open the first page. Her eyes widened in absolute terror as she recognized the official letterhead of her primary mortgage lender. "Your beautiful, sprawling mansion in Alpharetta," I explained, my voice echoing relentlessly across the silent pavilion. "The home you endlessly brag about at your church council meetings. The luxury estate where you hosted all your prestigious society gatherings. Trey secretly forged your signature and put that entire property up as collateral for a massive high-interest corporate loan. He did the exact same thing with your customized Mercedes-Benz and your secondary investment accounts. He legally bound every single asset you possess to his failing bankrupt company." Brenda let out a sound that was barely human. It was a visceral, suffocating gasp of pure horror. She dropped the papers onto the grass, clutching her chest as if she were having a sudden heart attack. "No," Brenda shrieked, looking wildly at Trey. "Trey, tell me this is a lie. Tell me you did not mortgage my house. Tell me you did not risk my home." Trey could not even meet her eyes. He squeezed his eyes shut and turned his head away, weeping silently. His sheer cowardice was the only confirmation Brenda needed. "You enabled a monster," I said, my voice dropping to a freezing clinical whisper. "You taught him that his actions had zero consequences. You taught him that he could simply take whatever he wanted and you would always cover it up to protect his pristine image. Well, he took everything you owned. And because his company is completely bankrupt, those loans have officially defaulted." I leaned down slightly, ensuring she heard every single word of her impending doom. "Tomorrow morning at exactly 8 o'clock, the bank is foreclosing on your precious mansion. The eviction notices have already been fully processed. The aggressive tow trucks are scheduled to repossess your car. You have absolutely nothing left, Brenda. By tomorrow afternoon, you will be entirely homeless, completely bankrupt, and stripped of every single material possession that ever gave your hollow life any meaning." Brenda collapsed entirely onto the white carpeted aisle. She beat her fists against the solid ground, screaming in raw, agonizing despair. The glamorous, untouchable matriarch of Atlanta high society was rapidly reduced to a sobbing, destitute woman lying in the dirt. The poetic justice of the moment was incredibly profound. 7 years ago, she had violently thrown me out of her house with nothing but garbage bags, abandoning me to the unforgiving streets. Now, she was about to experience the exact same terrifying reality, orchestrated entirely by the son she had violently protected. Suddenly, a new sound pierced through the heavy, humid Georgia air. It was not the gentle classical music from the string quartet, nor the shocked whispers of the elite wedding guests. It was the sharp, aggressive wail of rapidly approaching sirens. The sound grew increasingly louder, multiplying as a fleet of unmarked heavy-duty vehicles and official police interceptors sped down the long, winding driveway of the Sterling estate. These were not local patrol officers coming to quietly break up a simple domestic dispute. The sheer volume and reckless speed of the approaching vehicles indicated a massive, highly coordinated federal raid. The fleet of dark vehicles abruptly halted near the edge of the manicured lawn. The heavy doors swung open in perfect synchronization. A dozen men and women wearing thick tactical vests with bold yellow lettering stepped out. The lettering clearly read Financial Crimes Unit. They moved with absolute terrifying purpose, their faces set in grim lines of uncompromising authority. They completely ignored the lavish floral arrangements, the custom ice sculptures, and the stunned elite guests. They marched directly down the center aisle, their heavy boots moving in perfect unison. The lead detective, a tall, imposing man with a severe expression, approached the altar. He completely bypassed Brenda, who was still weeping pathetically on the ground, and walked straight toward Trey. The Sterling private security guards immediately stepped back, creating a clear, unobstructed path for the advancing federal authorities. Winston Sterling stepped forward to greet the lead detective. The billionaire patriarch stood tall, his posture radiating immense power and absolute control over the entire volatile situation. Winston had not just uncovered a massive fraud, he had masterfully orchestrated a completely inescapable legal execution. Detective Reynolds Winston said, his voice a low, commanding rumble that echoed perfectly through the pavilion speakers. "Thank you for arriving so promptly. My corporate security team has fully secured the suspect, and we have compiled the extensive digital and physical evidence required for your immediate investigation." "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," Detective Reynolds replied respectfully. He then turned his steely gaze directly onto my brother. Trey looked absolutely pathetic. His expensive ivory tuxedo was ruined, heavily covered in dark dirt, green grass stains, and crushed flower petals. His light skin was drenched in cold, terrified sweat. Winston Sterling turned to face the vast audience of 500 elite guests. He raised the microphone, demanding absolute silence with a single penetrating look. The loud crowd instantly complied, eager to hear the final judgment from the billionaire patriarch. "Ladies and gentlemen," Winston announced, his deep voice devoid of any mercy or hesitation, "the Sterling family empire has been meticulously built on a solid foundation of absolute trust, fierce loyalty, and uncompromising integrity. We absolutely do not tolerate deception. We do not negotiate with criminals. And we absolutely do not allow financial predators to infiltrate our sacred ranks." He pointed a sharp accusatory finger directly at Trey. "Earlier today, my elite legal team formally filed comprehensive criminal charges against the desperate man you see cowering on this lawn. We have happily provided federal authorities with irrefutable evidence of grand larceny, massive identity theft, severe wire fraud, and the aggressive forgery of high-level corporate documents. He attempted to use the Sterling name to launder $10 million of illegal underground debt. He brutally attempted to frame his own brilliant sister for his despicable financial crimes." Winston's eyes narrowed, his absolute disgust palpable. "The Sterling family is strongly pressing for the absolute maximum sentences on all criminal charges. We will utilize the full terrifying extent of our vast legal resources to assure this dangerous man is permanently removed from our civilized society." Detective Reynolds stepped forward, pulling a pair of heavy metallic handcuffs from his tactical belt. "Trey Anderson, you are under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and multiple counts of identity theft. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The sharp, metallic clicking sound of the heavy handcuffs locking tightly around Trey's wrists echoed very loudly across the silent estate. It was the definitive sound of his entire fraudulent life coming to a permanent, completely devastating end. Trey began to hyperventilate. The sheer, overwhelming terror of his impending incarceration completely shattered his remaining sanity. He dropped to his knees, his hands securely bound behind his back. He looked around wildly, his eyes darting across the vast sea of faces, desperately searching for a savior. He looked at Vivian, but the heiress simply turned her back to him in absolute disgust. He looked at me, but he knew I was the brilliant architect of his demise. Finally, his desperate tear-filled eyes landed on the one person who had always bailed him out of trouble. Mom, Trey wailed, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched scream. "Mom, please help me. Please do something. Call a lawyer. Tell them I did not mean it. Tell them it is a huge mistake. You have to save me, Mom. Please do not let them take me to prison." He wriggled on his knees across the wet grass, desperately attempting to move toward Brenda. It was a pathetic, repulsive display of absolute cowardice. He was 35 years old, a grown man who had intentionally ruined countless lives, yet he was crying for his mother to shield him from the dire consequences of his own malicious actions. I watched Brenda closely, wondering if her toxic maternal instinct would force her to defend her golden boy one last time. I wondered if she would scream at the police, fiercely demand his release, or attempt to physically block the detectives from taking him away. Instead, Brenda did something that completely validated every single boundary I had ever set. She slowly looked up from the bank foreclosure documents scattered on the grass. Her face was a horrific mask of selfish, unadulterated panic. She looked at Trey, her favored son, the boy she had worshipped and protected above all else. She looked at the steel handcuffs binding his wrists. She looked at the federal detectives surrounding him. And then she looked away. Brenda turned her back on her weeping, begging son. She completely ignored his desperate cries for help. She did not reach out to comfort him. She did not promise to call a lawyer. She was entirely consumed by her own catastrophic financial ruin. She was too busy sobbing over her lost mansion, her repossessed luxury cars, and her permanently eradicated social status to care about the son who was being dragged off to a federal prison. Her maternal love had never been real. It was always strictly conditional, based entirely on what Trey could provide for her grand image. Now that he was a convicted criminal who had systematically destroyed her wealth, he was completely useless to her. Too. "Mom, please," Trey screamed one final time as the tall detectives forcefully hauled him to his feet. "Do not let them take me." Brenda simply covered her ears with her shaking hands, weeping very loudly over the profound loss of her precious country club membership. She did not even watch as the police marched her golden boy down the long gravel driveway and shoved him violently into the back of a waiting transport vehicle. The heavy steel door slammed shut firmly, sealing Trey inside his new reality. I stood on the pristine lawn, the warm Georgia sun beating down on my shoulders. I felt an incredible, profound sense of absolute peace. The toxic cycle was finally broken. The fake empire was completely demolished. The final judgment had been delivered with brutal, uncompromising perfection. My vengeance was absolute, but my new life was truly just beginning. Section 12. Exactly 1,500 words. My vengeance was absolute, but my new life was truly just beginning. Before the federal transport vehicle could completely pull away from the pristine gravel driveway, the lead detective raised his hand firmly, halting the driver. Darius had just walked over with a final physical stack of sworn affidavits from the Sterling legal team that required the lead detective's immediate signature. The heavily armed officers forcefully pulled my brother out of the thick steel doors for a brief moment to verify his digital fingerprints on a mobile scanner right there on the hood of the police cruiser. It was a standard, deeply humiliating protocol for high-profile financial criminals, ensuring the authorities had processed the correct suspect before officially departing the private property. That brief, agonizing delay gave my brother one final desperate opportunity to confront the harsh reality of his utter destruction. Trey turned his head toward me. His face was heavily smeared with dark dirt, cold sweat, and the crushed, ruined remnants of his expensive white floral boutonniere. He looked absolutely nothing like the arrogant, light-skinned golden child who had relentlessly tormented me for my entire life. He looked incredibly small, fundamentally broken and completely stripped of his unearned privilege. He dug his expensive custom leather shoes into the white gravel, physically fighting against the incredibly firm grip of the two armed federal guards holding his biceps. "Simone, please!" Trey yelled, his voice cracking with raw, unfiltered terror. "You cannot let them do this to me. You have to tell them to stop. We are blood. We are family. You cannot send your own brother to a federal penitentiary." I stood perfectly still, my hands resting calmly at my sides. I did not move a single inch toward him. I simply watched his pathetic display of sheer cowardice with total detachment. "Please," Simone Trey begged, his eyes wide with a frantic, animalistic panic. "Family loyalty has to mean something to you. We grew up together. You cannot let the harsh criminal justice system take a successful black man down like this. They will completely destroy me in there. I will give you everything back. I will sign over every single fake asset immediately. I will publicly apologize on my knees right here in front of everyone." Just talk to Winston. You have the immense power to make the Sterling family drop these criminal charges. You are a billionaire. You can afford to easily pay off my massive debts. Just buy my freedom, please. I am begging you. The absolute stunning hypocrisy of his desperate plea was incredibly foul. He was attempting to weaponize family loyalty and racial solidarity to save his own skin, completely ignoring the undeniable fact that he had eagerly weaponized those exact same concepts to aggressively tear me down. He had been perfectly willing to forge my signature on $10 million of illegal predatory debt. He had been entirely prepared to let dangerous, violent loan sharks hunt me down in the dangerous streets of Atlanta. He was completely comfortable with the terrifying idea of a dark-skinned black woman rotting in a federal prison cell for his massive financial crimes. Yet now, facing the brutal consequences of his own malicious actions, he suddenly remembered we shared the same blood. I slowly walked across the crushed white rose petals, steadily closing the distance between the elegant floral altar and the flashing police cruiser. The heavy, humid Georgia air felt completely still, as if the entire estate was holding its breath to hear my final verdict. I stopped exactly 3 feet away from my brother. I looked down at him with zero emotion. There was no lingering anger in my heart, no lingering sadness, and absolutely no mercy. I looked at him with the cold, clinical detachment of a highly successful corporate executive evaluating a permanently bankrupt, completely worthless asset. Family loyalty? I asked, my voice deadly quiet, but carrying a sharp, freezing edge that made him flinch physically. You do not know the very first thing about genuine family loyalty, Trey. You only know how to manipulate generous people to serve your own toxic, selfish vanity. You used my brilliant mind to build your fake throne, and then you violently kicked me into the dirt to ensure no one would ever know the truth. You thought your light skin, your charismatic smile, and your custom-tailored suits made you completely untouchable in this city. You thought you could simply erase me from existence because I did not fit your shallow, prejudiced aesthetic. Trey let out a loud, pathetic sob, shaking his head frantically. I was wrong, Simone. I was so incredibly stupid. I will spend the rest of my miserable life making it up to you. Just give me one more chance. I tilted my head slightly, observing the absolute terror dominating his eyes. I thought about the vicious text messages he had sent me just a few hours prior. I thought about the decades of emotional abuse, the constant colorist remarks, and the relentless degradation I had survived because of him. I decided to give him exactly what he had given me. I mirrored the exact venomous insult he had typed in our family group chat that very morning. Find another cell, Trey, I stated coldly, every single syllable dripping with absolute finality. This one is for family, not embarrassments. The sheer absolute devastation on his face was incredibly satisfying. He finally realized that his charming words possessed zero currency here. His golden child status was permanently revoked. The lead detective finished signing the legal affidavits and signaled firmly to the armed guards. Without another second of delay, the officers aggressively shoved Trey forward, forcing his head down as they pushed him roughly into the dark, cramped back seat of the heavy transport vehicle. "No, Simone, wait!" Trey screamed one last time, his voice heavily muffled by the thick bulletproof glass. The heavy steel doors slammed shut with a loud, definitive metallic crash, permanently sealing my brother inside his bleak, inescapable new reality. The driver hit the gas, and the fleet of federal police cruisers sped rapidly away from the grand Sterling estate, taking the toxic, fraudulent villain of my life away forever. With Trey officially removed from the premises, the heavy, suffocating attention of the 500 elite guests shifted immediately. They did not look at me. They looked entirely at my mother. Brenda was still sitting pathetically on the damp grass near the front row of velvet chairs. Her expensive, heavily feathered fascinator hat had fallen off her head and lay trampled in the dirt. Her meticulously styled hair was a ruined, chaotic mess, and her designer makeup was heavily streaked with dark rivers of mascara. She looked absolutely nothing like the proud, arrogant matriarch who had spent her entire life desperately climbing the steep, unforgiving social ladder of Atlanta's black elite. Brenda slowly pushed herself up onto her trembling knees, looking around the massive pavilion with wide, desperate, pleading eyes. She was seeking any small shred of comfort, any sign of high society solidarity from the powerful people she had dedicated her life to impressing. The response she received was a masterclass in brutal upper-class rejection. The wealthy, prominent matriarchs of her exclusive church council, the very women who had previously praised her elegant taste and impeccable family image physically, turned their backs on her. They gathered their expensive silk shawls and custom clutch purses, whispering sharply to one another. The hushed, venomous scoffs echoed clearly across the silent lawn. They looked at Brenda as if she carried a highly contagious, deadly disease. In the prestigious, tightly knit circles of Atlanta's affluent Black community, reputation, integrity, and family loyalty were considered the absolute highest virtues. By publicly defending a convicted criminal and viciously discarding her own brilliant billionaire daughter, purely out of petty colorism and toxic vanity, Brenda had committed irreversible social suicide. She had entirely exposed herself as a fraudulent, abusive, and deeply immoral woman. "Oh, please," Brenda wept, reaching a trembling hand toward a prominent, highly respected female judge she had played tennis with just last week. "Please, you have to understand my position. I was completely tricked. I was manipulated by my son." The judge stopped walking. She looked down at Brenda with an expression of sheer, unadulterated disgust. "You are not tricked, Brenda," the judge said, her voice dripping with profound disdain. "We all heard those horrific audio recordings. We all heard the vile, disgusting things you said about your own child's skin and hair. You are a complete disgrace to our community. Do not ever attempt to contact me or my family again." The judge turned gracefully and walked away, joining the massive exodus of elite guests who were now rapidly evacuating the contaminated property. Brenda collapsed back onto the grass, burying her face in her hands, wailing in absolute agonizing despair. She was entirely stripped of the glamorous facade she had violently sacrificed her own daughter to maintain. Her house was being foreclosed on tomorrow. Her luxury cars were being repossessed. Her beloved golden son was heading to federal prison, and the elite society she worshipped had permanently, ruthlessly exiled her. I stood quietly beside the powerful Vivian and Winston Sterling, watching my broken mother deeply mourn the devastating death of her pathetic social status. I felt incredibly light, completely unburdened by the toxic chains that had violently weighed me down for 32 years. The cold reckoning was fully complete, leaving me surrounded by people who finally respected my true worth and brilliant mind. 6 months have passed since that spectacular afternoon on the Sterling estate lawn. The vibrant, humid summer of Atlanta faded into a crisp, golden winter, bringing with it a profound season of undeniable clarity and absolute justice. The federal justice system moves with a terrifying, unyielding efficiency when dealing with massive corporate fraud and irrefutable documentary evidence. Trey did not receive the lenient slap on the wrist probation sentence he so desperately cried for. Because he systematically forged signatures, attempted to launder millions of dollars of illicit underground debt through a major corporate acquisition, and stole highly classified intellectual property, the federal judge decided to make a very public example of him. He was swiftly convicted and sentenced to 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. There are no custom-tailored Italian suits or expensive bourbon tastings where he resides now. He is stripped of his charming facade, surrounded by hardened criminals who do not care about his light skin or his desperate desire to climb the social ladder. He is just another nameless inmate serving time for his own monumental greed. I do not visit him. I do not answer the frantic letters he sends from his cell begging for legal fees. He made his choices, and now he must live in the desolate concrete reality he built for himself. My mother, Brenda, suffered a fate that was arguably worse than a prison sentence for a woman so deeply obsessed with her public image. The morning after the canceled wedding, the banks ruthlessly executed their foreclosure orders. Heavily armed marshals physically escorted her out of her sprawling, luxurious Alpharetta mansion. Tow trucks repossessed her customized vehicles right off the grand driveway. She was left entirely bankrupt, possessing absolutely nothing but the designer clothes on her back and a mountain of residual debt from Trey's shattered empire. She desperately tried to crawl back to her prestigious church council, begging the wealthy matriarchs for a charitable loan or a temporary place to stay. But the Atlanta Black elite is fiercely protective of its reputation. The horrifying audio recordings of her vicious colorist remarks had spread like wildfire through the city. She was universally shunned, permanently exiled from the high society circles she worshipped. Today, the former queen of the country club works a grueling minimum wage shift at a discount retail store on the outskirts of the sprawling, bustling city. She spends her scheduled breaks frantically calling my old phone number, leaving long, weeping voicemails apologizing for her decades of abuse. She desperately wants her billionaire daughter to swoop in and rescue her from agonizing poverty. But that phone line was permanently disconnected 5 months ago. I completely changed my number, bought the commercial building she used to shop in, and entirely erased her from my existence. While my biological family wallows in the desolate ruins of their own making, I am sitting comfortably in a breathtaking glass-walled boardroom 60 stories above the bustling Atlanta skyline. The morning sun reflects brightly off the polished mahogany table. I am calmly sipping a cup of artisanal Earl Grey tea, sitting directly across from Vivian and Winston Sterling. We are not arguing over petty family drama. We are actively finalizing the legal paperwork for a massive, completely legitimate corporate merger between Aegis Financial Security and the Sterling media empire. Vivian sits beside me, reviewing the intricate contracts with the sharp, brilliant precision that makes her a terrifying force in the business world. Over the past 6 months, Vivian and I have formed an incredibly powerful, unbreakable bond. We deeply connected over our shared resilience, our mutual refusal to be manipulated by fraudulent men, and our fierce dedication to protecting our hard-earned legacies. She is no longer just a business partner. She is a trusted ally, a brilliant confidant, and a true sister in every sense of the word that matters. Winston watches us collaborate with a deep, respectful smile, recognizing that the alliance between our two dominant empires will create an untouchable generational dynasty in the tech and real estate sectors. We built a genuine partnership founded on transparency, mutual respect, and absolute unwavering loyalty. As I firmly sign my name on the final page of the billion-dollar merger agreement, handing the expensive fountain pen back to Vivian with a warm smile, I feel a profound, overwhelming sense of inner peace. The intense, agonizing wounds from my childhood have finally healed, leaving behind incredibly strong, resilient scars. I spent 32 years of my life desperately trying to earn a seat at a table that was specifically designed to exclude me. I exhausted myself trying to prove my worth to a mother who was blinded by toxic prejudice, and a brother who viewed my brilliant mind as nothing more than a resource to steal. I finally realized that begging for acceptance from people who actively disrespect you is a monumental waste of your precious spirit. Blood does not automatically make a family. Shared DNA does not guarantee love, protection, or basic human decency. Real family is built entirely on a foundation of mutual respect, steadfast loyalty, and showing up for one another in the darkest, most difficult times. When they violently denied me a seat at their table, I did not cry. I simply walked away, built my own incredibly lucrative table, and filled it with brilliant, loyal people who actually recognized my true value. My dark skin and natural hair are not flaws to be hidden in the shadows. They are beautiful, powerful testaments to my unyielding strength. The fraudulent villains who attempted to destroy me ultimately engineered their own magnificent permanent downfall. Their hollow kingdom of lies burned brightly, lighting the clear, undeniable path to my ultimate triumph. When toxic people close the door on you, buy the building and change the locks. Have you yourself ever cut off toxic family to protect your peace? Drop your story in the comments and please do not forget to subscribe.